They knocked down everyone in sight, as if they were going to die together with their enemies. From beginning to end, it took less than 3 minutes. From beginning to end, the young man was expressionless. When no one moved in the alley, he turned around and took back his suit. He sat on the fire hydrant tiredly and waited for the sirens to sound in the distance. Blood flowed down from his trousers and formed a shallow puddle on the ground. It reflected a pair of calm eyes. It made one's blood run cold. The recording stopped abruptly. Then, Director Fu slammed the table angrily. "Why, sure, didn't you say that you don't know martial arts? I'm a natural-born god. I'm a self-taught genius. Why sure shrunk his neck. Do I have to be hacked to death on the spot for it to be considered normal?" This was a vicious brawl. If an ascendant was involved, it would be an even bigger crime. Director Fu stared into Weischer's eyes. "You know that the Special Affairs Division specializes in dealing with such incidents, right? Last year, I sent a kid about the same age as you to the border. Guess what happened to him?" Weischer asked tentatively. "Becoming a Buddha? Isn't that great? Even the grass on the grave is as tall as you." Director Fu turned to leave. When he opened the door, he hesitated for a moment and looked back at him. "I've already seen the statements of those people. I know that you fought back in self-defense. But at that time, did you really have no other choice? Weischer?" Weischer was at a loss. "You're an ascendant. The moment you ascend, you're no longer the same as an ordinary person. Most of the time, you often have more options and full power because you have power." Director Fu looked into his eyes. "But does the so-called power have to be shown to the weak for you to feel that it's valuable?" Weischer didn't know what to say. Director Fu turned to leave, but he heard a voice behind him. Wait a minute." He slowly turned back with a cold expression. "Do you have anything else to say?" Weischer hesitated for a long time, then raised his hand and asked weakly, "I'm a little hungry. Do you provide food here?" Bang! The door was slammed shut. When AI Ching arrived, Director Fu had already smoked half a pack of cigarettes in the office. He still couldn't suppress the evil fire in his heart. He wanted to hit someone. He wanted to beat up a miner. To hell with the protection of miners. "Where's Weischer?" AI Ching asked. Director Fu raised his hand and pointed in the direction of the interrogation room. "He's still eating our boxed lunch. It's already the 6th box. Hurry up and take the pig spirit back. Okay?" It's normal for him to be in puberty. AI Ching was calm about this. On the way here, she had already learned about the cause and effect. Director Fu wouldn't put the attitude of condemning Weischer on the side of the official inspector. In Dongsha, the relationship between the inspector and the Special Affairs Division was often very awkward. In the end, it all came from the standpoint of both sides. As everyone knew, even an ordinary ascendant without the stigmata implantation had abilities and physical strength that ordinary people couldn't reach. Therefore, in order to deal with the threat of the border to the greatest extent, and to prevent this force that could be used to protect the present and the border from being abused in war, all ascendants had the qualification to be exempted from military service. In other words, other than the astronomy conference that passed the resolution of the 5 permanent leaders, no organization or force could forcibly recruit ascendants to fight at any time. They also couldn't illegally detain or inhumane experiments on ascendants. This law, engraved in the 12 copper tables, protected the personal safety and freedom of ascendants to a certain extent. But at the same time, in order to prevent ascendants from using their power recklessly, all crimes against ascendants would be increased by 1 level, and all prisons would be unified at the border. The existence of the Special Affairs Division was a violent organization established to prevent ascendants from harming ordinary people. Most of the members were undoubtedly elite soldiers who had undergone elite training. They fought in groups and used long guns, short cannons, and tomahawk missiles to teach people how to behave. In the present world with the 3 great blockades, other than the few ascendants, the biggest source of violence was the military. Not to mention little boy Big Ivan, or the missile bombers, just the frontal firepower of the artillery battalion and the cooperation of Bhutan was enough to make those monsters suffer. Nothing could fight against the military head-on. Whoever fought back would die, even if it was an ascendant, and the person responsible for verifying the crime of ascendants and issuing the black letter was the responsibility of the inspector. The inspector usually wouldn't go against the Special Affairs Division. As long as they could maintain the balance between ordinary people and ascendants, that was enough. More often than not, when the Special Affairs Division wanted to do something, they just needed to call the inspector and file a case. Other than the development of the border, what they should be worried about was the conflict between ascendants for the sake of profit. In the worst-case scenario, they didn't even care if their brains were spilled out. They just didn't want to splash on the ordinary people who lived their lives. They would kill whoever dared to mess around. The present world was only so big. It couldn't even hold a few natural enemies, and it couldn't hold so many people. Thankfully, Xin High was really F** King small. There were only 7 or 8 sublimators, and they were not a big deal at all. Everyone was living a very peaceful life. Some were male prostitutes, some were second-hand dealers, and there were even some who ran a detective agency and slacked off all day. It was quite a peaceful life. After dealing with the people who were secretly causing trouble, AI Ching and the Special Affairs Division didn't have any reason to go against each other. A vicious fight wasn't enough to make them turn on each other. Neither side would put their personal emotions into work for a small matter. After a simple exchange of information, they went straight to the point. Who attacked him? A bunch of trash that can't even be seen in public. Speaking of this, Director Fu was furious. He placed the files on the table one by one and counted them one by one. Illegal gang members, human traffickers, fugitives, and people without jobs. What the F***CK are they? As he spoke, he couldn't help but light up a cigarette. Seeing that AI Ching was there, he pushed open the window, took 2 deep puffs, and extinguished the cigarette. He took out a phone from a bag and asked, "You've heard of the collection of 10,000 sins, right? That dark web app." AI Ching saw the skeleton icon on the phone screen and couldn't help but frown. In fact, although this app was a software, its nature was more complicated. It was already in the category of being a virus. Even the Astronomy Society had set up a file to target it. Unfortunately, the existence of the free border, dark web couldn't be eradicated. In short, it could be said to be the intermediary platform of the underworld. They provided all kinds of transactions that satisfied the dark side of humans, whether it was murder, kidnapping, human organ trading, slavery, or even the deeper level of stigmata, relics from the border, origin crystals, offerings. Everything was available. There was nothing that they did not want. And now, someone had posted a bounty on why sure, but who would be so bored as to compete with a salted fish? AI Ching calmly drank the cheap tea leaves in the office. She put down the teacup indifferently. "If you're so scared, why don't you just kill him?" "Do you think I haven't thought about it?" Director Fu asked. "On the night of the Red Glove's death, when I saw him for the first time in the rain, I had the same impulse. I can't accept the existence of a potential lunatic in my jurisdiction. But what can I do? I'm 46 years old this year, and I already have a child. Do you want me to kill another child because he might commit a crime in the future? Miss AI, he's only 17 years old, and the Protection of Minors Act is on his side. He still has a chance to choose his own future. Choose a future that won't hurt most people. That's what you call a domestic dog, right? AI Ching asked coldly. Cover your ears and pretend you can't hear. Cover your eyes and pretend nothing happened. Endure the pain until it becomes a habit. Submit to the abuse. Wag your tail and wait for the reward. Do you think that kind of life is a happy one? Director Fu was angered. He has more choices. He doesn't. AI Ching said, his surname is Huai, just like my surname is not AI. Whether he struggles or not, he can't change what happened in the past, just like you, and I can't decide a person's future. She said, this is destined. Director Fu asked coldly, what do you think he will think of you when he finds out the truth? Who cares? No matter what choice he makes, I won't be surprised. AI Ching looked into his eyes calmly and said word by word, but before that, I won't allow anyone to touch him. Then what are you doing? Director Fu was amused. Atonement? AI Ching was expressionless. I'm just hoping that someone will come and settle the score with me. In the silence, Director Fu didn't say anything else. He just pointed in the direction of the interrogation room and asked her to take his subordinate away. At the same time, Huai Shi was eating to his heart's content in the interrogation room. After finishing the supper of an unknown employee, he wiped his mouth and shouted, another bowl! In the silence, the few Special Affairs Division officers sitting there didn't say anything. They just looked at him with their arms crossed, a trace of pity in their eyes, until Huai Shi turned around and saw AI Ching behind him. Don't always let others think that I didn't pay you a salary, okay? Sorry. Sorry for what? Because of how much you eat. AI Ching shook her head. The Astronomy Society has a drug specifically for the development of ascendants. Do you need me to buy it for you? Huai Shi didn't know how to explain the crow incident. He could only scratch his head. I've already bought it. You dongri again. AI Ching raised her eyebrows, seemingly unhappy. It's better not to go to the detective's place. That guy isn't easy to deal with either. Okay. Huai Shi, the Federation, readily accepted her advice. After the few officers left, AI Ching asked, what's going on today? Sorry, I caused trouble again. Don't always apologize for other people's mistakes. The girl rubbed her eyebrows unhappily and sighed. To be honest, I don't care what you turned that group of social trash into. As an employee of the Astronomy Society, when you encounter an attack, the standard response procedure even includes the option of killing. You understand? Don't underestimate the privileges of the Astronomy Society. Even if you pull out a gun and kill them all, there's no problem with the procedure. At most, you'll be recorded internally after going through the procedures. I'm just curious, what's your reason for doing this? Huai Shi didn't understand. Usually you'd run away, right? She said, shamelessly begging for mercy or running away when you can't beat them. It's not your style to fight head-on. Huai Shi was speechless. Am I a coward in your mind? What do you think? Okay, I think you're right. Huai Shi sighed and scratched his head. He didn't know what to say. If you want to say something, you should be angry, right? Then, when you weren't careful, you went a little overboard and ended up like this. Does it have anything to do with Lao Yang's funeral? Huai Shi was stunned for a long time before he smiled awkwardly. How is that possible? AI Ching didn't say anything. She just looked at him as if waiting for him to continue. After a long time, Huai Shi finally admitted defeat. Okay, probably a little. He looked down at the wounds and bandages on his body and sighed helplessly. I'm scared. But no matter how beautiful my words are, when a group of people surrounded me in an alley with knives in their hands and said that they wanted to kill me, I couldn't help but feel scared. I always thought that I was so stubborn that I wasn't even afraid of death. But when I saw my friend lying in the incinerator, I realized that not only was I scared, but I was scared to death. Huaishir sighed. I've been a happy idiot for so many years. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to be happy, and I wouldn't even be able to continue being an idiot. But what can I do? I can't even live my own life well. Even if I go shopping when I have nothing to do, there will be people who want to kill me. No matter how annoying I am, this is too much, right? Yes. AI Ching nodded as if she agreed, but he didn't know what she agreed with. Was it annoying or too much? Huaishir smiled bitterly. He reached out to hold the table and propped himself up. The bandages on his body were bleeding again. This time, the injury was really not light. He found another bad habit that he had developed after reading the records. It was convenient to die at will in the records, but in reality, he would have to pay a heavy price. 1 against 7 sounded awe-inspiring, but it was impossible not to be injured when 7 against 1. Do you want me to give you a hand? A minute later, Huaishir looked at the scale on the ruler in astonishment. 8 meters? The last time he measured himself barefoot, he was still 77 meters tall. In other words, he had grown 3 centimeters in just 2 days. It's not just height. Weight, body fat, and blood have also changed. It's just that there's no testing equipment here, so you can't tell. After about 2 weeks, your height will probably be fixed. The next step is to strengthen the details of your bones, nerves, organs, and muscles until you reach the theoretical limit of ordinary people. Depending on the difference in your ability, some aspects may be strengthened again. The range of the hand of confinement is your hands. When the time comes, the fine operation and dexterity of your fingers will be greatly improved. After Crow finished speaking, he threw the Book of Destiny and the potion over with his wings. However, before that, you should think about how to earn back the cost of the potion materials next week. Huaishir's expression stiffened. The heavy loan made him lose his smile. Swiping the card felt good for a moment. He sighed and pushed the door open. Behind him, Crow waved at him. Be careful on the road. Remember to take your medicine and get along well with your classmates. Get along well with my mother. Are you my mother? So straightforward. Crow was stunned for a moment and looked embarrassed. If you want, just call me Mother. It's embarrassing to repeat the word. Huaishir almost tripped on the stairs. He turned around and glared at her, then stepped on his way to school. One good thing about being an art student was that there were basically no classes in the first half of the 3rd year of high school. Everyone was grasping the last sprint before the year before. After all, the fate of an art student was determined not only by the college entrance examination, but also by the professional examination and the on-campus recruitment of various schools. Huaishir only needed to show his face in class. Then he could go to the piano room to practice. Occasionally, he would appear in the evening self-study class. It was simply unrestrained. Other people might apply for a sprinting class outside, but for the stingy Huaishir, it was impossible for him to fork out tens of thousands of yuan in tuition fees for these 3 months. In order to save money, he would do anything. Moreover, now that he had passed the 8th level of ABRSM, he would go to Jinling to take the primary professional examination next month. There was no need to burn money. For so many years, he had been developing wretchedly. However, when it came to the cello, he had never been afraid of anything. Even now that he had become a sublimator, he had never changed his dream of finding a proper job with the cello. Dominate the world. Harem? Compared to these, he hoped that he could have a place in Vienna's Golden Hall in his lifetime. Thinking of this, he suddenly hesitated. He knocked on the piano case behind him. Should he cut off Crow's shopping list first and save some money to replace the cello? Although it didn't have to be made by a master of hundreds of thousands or millions, It would be good to say goodbye to the factory. Just as his thoughts were running wild, he heard two familiar voices in front of him. "Oh, Dad, you can just drop me off here. If other students see this, they will laugh at us." Why would a father laugh at his daughter, sending her to school? The middle-aged man's helpless voice sounded. His tone was full of affection. "Do you have enough pocket money? Dad has to work overtime these 2 days. Do you want me to give you some more? Mom already gave me some. Anyway, there is nothing to spend in school. What she gives is what she gives. What Dad gives is what Dad gives. Take it, take it." It sounded like a loving father and a filial daughter. Except for the two people who were talking, there was something wrong. Weisher couldn't help but stop in his tracks. Subconsciously, he wanted to turn around and hide behind the telephone pole. Unfortunately, it was too late. When the girl turned around, she saw him and her eyes lit up. Weisher is here too? I have been calling you for the past few days, but you didn't answer." Weisher froze and turned around stiffly. He saw the girl who was wearing the school uniform of Doomsday, which did not hide her beauty. And beside her, Director Fu of the Special Affairs Department was staring at him with his eyes wide open. Then he forced a smile. "Oh my God, so you guys are a family. No wonder you are both surnamed Fu. Why didn't I think of this?" "Oh, long time no see, class monitor." And he smiled awkwardly and looked at Director Fu behind her. "Uncle, Fu?" The middle-aged man looked at Weisher in silence. His expression was so calm that it was frightening. Uncle Fu did not speak. "Uncle Fu does not want to talk to you. Uncle Fu is accumulating anger points. Uncle Fu wants to kill you." Fortunately, Uncle Fu finally calmed down and squeezed out a kind smile on his old face. "Xiaoyi, is this your classmate?" "Yes." Fu raised her hand and patted Weisher's shoulder. "Dad, this is the good friend that I've been telling you about. He taught me how to read music scores. He's really good at the cello, and he's also good at his studies." "Really?" Director Fu smiled. "Then you should get along well." Although he was smiling, the look in his eyes reminded one of the express bus to the crematorium in the eastern suburbs. Meanwhile, Fu was still praising Weisher to her own father. Weisher wanted to cover her face and cry, I didn't. Do you know each other?" Fu seemed to have realized something. She tilted her head and looked at them, her ponytail swaying. Weisher glanced at Director Fu, who had an expression that said, "You're dead if you say it out loud." She hesitated for a long time before finally saying, "I've met him a few times. A few days ago." "Oh, I see." Fu did not suspect anything and believed him. Director Fu's expression improved a little when he saw how perceptive he was. He patted Weisher on the shoulder and said, "Good boy, you have to study hard, okay?" He deliberately emphasized the words "study well." Weisher felt like his shoulder blade was about to be broken by this old bastard. Seeing that the school gate was right in front of them, Director Fu stopped in his tracks and smiled at his daughter. "I'll see you off here. Hurry up, I have to go now." Seeing her classmates waving at her from afar, Fu nodded and waved at her father before running towards her classmates. Only Director Fu, who was smiling as he watched his daughter leave, and Weisher, whose shoulders were gripped tightly by him, were left behind. Weisher wanted to cry, but had no tears. He looked back at the middle-aged man whose face was gradually turning cold. He could only squeeze out a weak smile and beg for mercy. "Uncle Fu, be gentle, it hurts." Uncle Fu did not spit out blood. With a livid face, he lifted the hem of his jacket and showed him his gun holster. Thus, Weisher shut up and waited for his punishment. After a long time, Uncle Fu finally caught his breath and asked, "Are you close to my daughter?" "No, not at all." Huaisher shook his head like a rattle drum. We've only met a few times. How many times is that? 1 or 2 times. Director Fu did not fall for his trick. He had seen all kinds of bad guys over the years. Young people like Huaisher were unstable elements in society. At the age of 15 or 16, their hormones were like wild dogs. They might rape and rob one day, especially when Huaisher had a criminal record from yesterday. How could he be assured that his daughter would be in the same school as such a dangerous person? When he saw Huaisher's file, he wanted to transfer him to another school. Kid, tell me honestly. He put his hand on the handle of his gun and stared at Huaisher. What is your relationship with my daughter? What else could it be? It was a pure, leveling relationship. Your daughter only knows how to spend money on games. It was all because of me that she was able to get to the diamond level. What else could Huaisher say? He could not say that the two of them had always been on good terms. Last time, the two of them worked together for the school's art performance. One of them played the violin while the other sang an opera, right? Needless to say, the effect was quite good at that time. This only proved that Uncle Fu was not a good parent. He did not even come to watch his daughter's performance. Moreover, in order to rehearse, the two of them spent several nights alone in the piano room. If Huaisher wanted to, something would have happened long ago. However, if this daughter Khan knew, he would definitely shoot him on the street, right? Perhaps it had something to do with the low enrollment rate. In addition to recruiting a large number of repeaters every year, there were many preferential treatment for the arts students who had an easier time enrolling. As long as the numbers on the banner hanging in front of the school, every year after the college entrance examination results came out, nothing else mattered. Moreover, Huaisher's performance had always been good. He never caused trouble, and his cello grades were good enough. After he received the promise that he would take extra cultural classes next semester, the Academic Affairs Office simply issued a certificate allowing him to smoothly obtain the privileges of an art student. He would always wander around during class, wander around when he had nothing to do, and disappear when he was on duty or something. Such an annoying creature, in the eyes of the hard-working college entrance examination candidates, was like a school stray dog. Even Huaisher didn't expect that it would be so easy for him to get the certificate. The other students would only be released after the studio or the piano room teacher came over to vouch for them. Why did it seem like they couldn't wait to put the certificate in his hands? He didn't expect that a certain middle-aged man who was watching him through the surveillance camera couldn't wait for him to get out of the classroom as soon as possible and as far away from his precious daughter as possible. It could only be said that the middle-aged man who was ready to snipe at any time was too scary. Huaisher, who more or less understood the situation, shook her head and sighed. She felt that her privacy had been violated, but when she looked at the cameras on the wall that had turned 180 degrees to aim at her, she thought about how many of her hunk brothers had their own cameras. Forget it. Anyway, it wouldn't hurt to be watched. In any case, he would skip classes if he had something to do and stay in the piano room if he didn't have anything to do. Thanks to Huaisher's excellent cello grades and various competition certificates, the school gave him a little back door in this regard. For example, there was a separate room in the piano room that wasn't too narrow. He didn't have to wait in line like the others. In any case, he was the only cello player in the school. After he entered the room and cleaned up the dust accumulated during the summer vacation, Huaisher opened the piano case and began to skillfully fish. Practicing in the piano room? No way. Directly above his cubicle was the teacher's office. The Wi-Fi speed was superb, and he never needed to use a SIM card to watch videos. It was unlike the broadband that Crow secretly used. Not only was the speed not very good, but he also had to be on tenor hooks when using it. He first browsed through the local news out of habit, It was just some soft articles like Full Sparrow Banquet, hits Xian High, business booming, hard to find a spot. Occasionally, there would be unlucky news about grave robbers in the city. He read for a few minutes and closed it. To kill time, he clicked on the Silent Crown app. He hadn't logged in for a long time. After downloading a rather large update, a pop-up window popped up. Limited time event. Dark World Dragon's Maze. Under the exploration of the exploration team, the mysterious kingdom of Yamatai hidden in the Dark World has revealed the tip of the iceberg. What kind of secrets are hidden in the kingdom that has been dead for thousands of years? What kind of treasures are buried in the ruins occupied by natural disasters? Strength of heaven and earth, freedom of mind, natural disaster, White Emperor's Son, SSR, has been added to the limited time card pool. It was another sudden update, an original story with hundreds of thousands of words, and enough gems to draw 10 cards 3 times in a row. Looking at the drop list, there were quite a few rare items that could be easily dropped. How could the developers be so kind? Were they crazy? Unfortunately, the drop rate of SSRs in this game was very low, and Weischer couldn't bear to spend money on them. So far, more than 30 SSRs have been released, but he only had one, and it was the doppelganger Yenchinga that was automatically given to him after he received the African medal. His title was quite impressive, called Self-Defense, the Clouds Are Me. Unfortunately, he was a support, and his damage output was very low. He would be a dead giveaway in the high-level arena. It had to be said that the new girl was really pretty. She looked like a girl who liked sports, and her picture was full of praises. Weischer couldn't help but want to spend money on her. Holding on to the slightest hope, he drew 10 cards in a row and then saw a blue sky and white clouds. Fine, 100 gems, and he gave it to Charles again. However, before he could close the game, he heard the door being kicked open with a bang. A petite figure walked in and skillfully sat on the small sofa opposite Weischer. "Quick, I'll carry you." It was Fui. This place had almost become her base. Even the small sofa was moved here from the student union. There was also a large board in the corner with a bunch of her handheld devices, so it was convenient to charge them at any time. If it wasn't for the inconvenience of moving the TV, she would probably have moved 2 home appliances here. Weischer rolled his eyes. "You're skipping class again?" "You're skipping class, but I'm the student union secretary." Fu-Yi looked at him from the corner of her eyes. "Besides, I'm going to the art studio for training next week. It doesn't matter if I leave early. Isn't it better to play a game than to waste time?" After saying that, without waiting for Weischer to take a nap, she skillfully opened the game, pulled Weischer into the team, and started to play duo. After the popularity of the PUBG King of the Dark Zone mode, the lousy Silent Crown game released a new MOBA-type strife mode, which started another wave of delightful skin scams. Fu-Yi's standard was actually not bad. After all, she was considered a rather popular amateur streamer. Other than relying on her face, her skills were barely passable. However, she was always careless and liked to play tricks. She also had to be an ADC. Often, she would scam 9 out of 10 times. Accidentally, the effects of the program were very good, and she actually managed to scam a lot of rockets. As soon as she entered the game, she instantly locked Hand of God. Her teammates went crazy. This kind of acrobatic character in the later stages of the game was indeed unparalleled. However, in the early stages, it was really a mess. More than once, players complained that the official design of this hero was problematic. It was too easy to target, and to survive until the later stages, it all depended on luck. "You're starting to play?" Weischer sighed and could only choose Moonchant as support. "All right, who asked Daddy to love you?" Then, as expected, it was 5 consecutive defeats. Not only did she successfully fall below bronze, Even Huaishi's rank was successfully dragged down. Huaishi's rank had regressed too much. He hadn't played for more than a month. Originally, he could still barely heal, but now he could only scam with her. After a few rounds of ranking, Huaishi rejected her invitation for another round and turned off his phone. As if after the event, Fu Yi skillfully took out a cigarette from Huaishi's piano case. After lighting it for herself, she threw one over to Huaishi. The way she smoked with her legs crossed was full of the aura of a bully. One couldn't tell that she was the little bunny in white from school in the morning at all. If Director Fu knew about this, he would probably give the order to shoot Huaishi, this grandson, on the spot. Huaishi himself even learned to smoke from Fu Yi. What didn't this old driver know? Huaishi wanted to say something, but stopped. In the end, he waved his hand weakly and looked sadly at the sunlight outside the window, as if he was an abandoned mistress. Let's not meet again in the future. What are you afraid of? Fu Yi laughed gloatingly. Afraid that he'll break your legs? Huaishi was stunned. Did he really beat you up? He did. Fu Yi held the cigarette in her mouth and used her free hands to tuck her long hair behind her ears and tie it back into a ponytail. The last time he found a love letter in my bag, he broke the leg of the guy who confessed to me. I didn't even have time to enjoy the feeling of being pursued, and no boy in class dared to talk to me. Huaishi was stunned. And then Fu Yi shrugged. Then my mother divorced him. Domestic violence. My mother and he can't control me anymore. Huaishi was stunned for a long time and sighed helplessly. Sorry. Chapter 45. Clearly, she understood the nature of her father's job. Fu Yi looked at Huaishi with a strange expression. Did you get into trouble during the summer break? Yes. Huaishi nodded, not knowing what to say. Fu Yi didn't ask any more questions, only saying, there's no need to be afraid of him. He's just used to being rough and doesn't know how to be tactful. Probably everyone who's been on the battlefield is like this. No matter how good they think, they're never liked. After she wandered around for a while, she received a message from the student council for a meeting. She returned to her quiet demeanor and left. Huaishi stayed alone in the piano room until the evening self-study session. According to Crow's instructions, he took some medicine, then practiced for a few hours and completed his meditation for the day. He felt that as his body developed, the waves of origin substance became more abundant. He guessed that he would soon reach the peak, right? Soon, after the puberty period ended, he would be able to start preparing for the sacred mark. Crow said that he would choose a system and type that would be perfect for him. It would definitely be a large sum of money. Thinking about this gave Huaishi a headache, but now he seemed to be gradually getting used to this kind of heavy daily routine. Practicing the piano, chatting with his classmates, slacking, dealing with the teacher's inspection, making a few mistakes, and receiving a few reprimands, meditating, making sand carvings, playing mobile games for free, without spending money, doing homework, taking exams, taking time to complete the astronomy meeting, reading the records of the Book of Destiny, preparing for the college entrance exam. If you counted the number of things he had to do, it would be crazy. Even though there were many things that weren't perfect, there were also many things that didn't seem necessary, but this was the precious life he had obtained through his own efforts. Even if it was a bit hard, he would gladly endure it. Then, he left early before the evening self-study session. What a joke. It wasn't easy to get special privileges. Was he going to stay up until 9 o'clock every day and miss the last bus to ride home? Now, he was a man who could afford a monthly bus ticket. Huaishi carried his piano case, humming a song, and deliberately walked around the school building. Under the envious and jealous gazes of his classmates, he swaggered out of the school gate. Then, he was stopped by the gatekeeper. Huaishi, right? The security guard who was playing with his phone also had some impression of him. He pointed at the door and said, "There's a parcel for you. Just don't do it again." This isn't a collection point. Next time, I'll directly inform your class teacher to come and collect it." "What?" Huaishur was stunned and looked at the pile of express delivery boxes in the corner of the gatehouse. He didn't know why. His hair stood on end. He glared at Huaishur and waved his hand to signal everyone to retreat a long distance. Not long after, two experts took off their helmets and walked out. Their messy hair stuck to their foreheads and sweat dripped from their chins. "It's done." They helped each other take off the heavy protective suits and then showed the box lying in the explosion-proof ball to Division Chief Fu. In the box that was cut open, there was a damned thing tied together with dense cables and circuit boards. The countdown had stopped at 1.5 hours. It looks quite ordinary. Division Chief Fu did not take a closer look. Instead, a hand reached into the jar and took it out. He was so shocked that he almost stopped breathing. It was AI Ching. She sat in her wheelchair and fiddled with the dangerous item that could blow her up. "What's the trigger type?" "There are two types. It's a combination of a timer and a trigger. It will explode when the box is opened and when the time comes. The explosives are ordinary mining explosives. They're relatively weak. They'll probably only flatten the gatehouse." The expert panted and sat on the ground smoking. "If it's opened in a classroom or something, the consequences will be worrying." Division Chief Fu clasped his hands behind his back and did not speak. The veins on his hands behind his back were bulging. "It's become a vicious public safety incident." AI Ching rubbed the space between her eyebrows. She was a little troubled. "Who sent it here?" Soon, the footages of the deliverman were displayed on the surveillance cameras on the road. It was a hunchbacked man wearing a hat. He was wearing old clothes from Northern Express, but he did not look like a deliverman at all. His footsteps were a little staggered, and he walked with a limp. His face was hidden under the brim of his hat, so his face could not be seen clearly. After passing the package to the guard, he rode away on his bicycle. But before he left, he raised his head to glance at the surveillance cameras as if he was provoking them. It revealed the twisted face that was covered in horrible burns. There was still the warmth and friendliness that he used to have. He was grinning happily. He was looking at everyone present. There was no need to think about it. As long as they saw that face, everyone present who had experienced the turmoil half a month ago would be able to recognize it. That was the former leader of the Salvation Society in name Wang Hai. Division Director Fu widened his eyes in disbelief. "He's still alive?" "From the looks of it now, there's nothing wrong with him being alive." AI Ching glanced coldly at the smug smile on the screen. "And he still has the energy to challenge us." Soon, the short discussion came to an end. Without a doubt, this was a provocation aimed at the Special Affairs Department and the Astronomy Society. A surviving member of the Salvation Society dared to conduct such an attack in Exine. This was like jumping off a ship at the entrance of an oceanic trench prison. They had a clear death wish. At this point, other than killing this bunch of bastards, there was no other choice. From that moment onwards, the Special Affairs Division had already started their operation. Very soon, the spies that were planted in every corner of Exine High would start to search for any trace that had anything to do with Wang Hai. Once they found any trace of him, a group of impatient brothers would descend from the sky with guns and small cannons to teach him a lesson. From the beginning to the end, Huaishur sat on the steps with a calm expression. He didn't say anything. There was only silence. It was as if he was in a daze. After a long time, he recovered from his daze as if he had just woken up from a dream. He looked at AI Ching beside him. "Is it over?" "It's possible that this is just the beginning." AI Ching shrugged. "Don't be too stressed. The people from the Special Affairs Department will send you back first. Rest well tonight. I'll inform you if there's any news. Okay. Huaisher nodded and didn't say anything else. But after taking 2 steps, he seemed to remember something and turned back to ask, "By the way, can you help me apply for leave?" AI Ching was taken aback. She looked into his eyes. After a long time, she sighed and nodded. "Thank you." Huaisher smiled and didn't say anything else. He just picked up the piano case and took one last look at the school that had returned to peace and the light in the piano room in the distance. He seemed to see Fu Yi's shadow through the window. She was looking at him from afar, so Huaisher waved at her. He waved goodbye. After a long time, he pulled back his gaze and turned to leave. "I'm back." Amid the screeching sound of the door bolt, Huaisher pushed open the door of the Stone Essence Museum. Even though there was no one waiting for him in the courtyard, he still called out like he was going home. The iron door slowly closed behind him as if responding to him. As soon as he entered, he saw the crow standing beside the boiling pot on the table in the hall, waving his wings at Huaisher. "Dalong, time to drink your medicine. Didn't I already drink today's medicine this morning?" Huaisher walked over, picked up a test tube on the table, and drank it in one gulp. "It's an extra meal. By the way, I adjusted the formula of the medicine according to your current situation." After the crow explained, he didn't ask any more questions. Instead, he tilted his head curiously and looked at Huaisher in front of him, as if he had found something interesting. "What's wrong?" Huaisher was puzzled. "No, I'm just thinking, if it's normal, you would respond when you hear Dalong drinking medicine, right?" The crow asked, "Did something happen, Huaisher?" Huaisher was silent. After a long time, he slowly shook his head and turned to go upstairs to the bedroom. Nothing happened. He turned his back to the crow and whispered, "I'm going to sleep. Good night." He closed the door, took off his coat, and kicked off his shoes. Huaisher lay on the bed and stared blankly at the crack on the wall as if he was in a daze. After a long time, he buried his face in the pillow regretfully. "Damn, I'm so weak." On the branch outside the window, the crow, who was staring at all this, didn't go in to comfort him. It seems that he lost miserably. She narrowed her eyes. "The collection of stigmata materials has to be put on the agenda." She went back to the table in the hall and scribbled in her book, trying to remember something as she mused over her plans and what she had to prepare. Then it was a long night. Huaisher's new semester and the peaceful life he longed for came to an end in a hurry. He was on vacation. Chapter 46. After a long time, Huaisher had a dream. He dreamt that he had finally realized his dream and walked into the Golden Hall in Vienna under the enthusiastic applause of the audience. The host was so moved that he was about to cry. Everyone stared at the greatest musician of the century with fanaticism. Then Huaisher stood on the stage and looked at them arrogantly. He nodded slightly and raised his hand to signal them to be quiet. Then silence came. Everyone held their breath and held back their tears. The female audience looked at him expectantly and passionately as if they wanted to have children with him. Huaisher glanced at them indifferently and revealed an evil smile. He took out a handkerchief to wipe his hands and threw it aside. He picked up the cello and took a deep breath. She played the song "Little Widow Goes to the Grave," which sounded like she was weeping and complaining. Then, before he was beaten to death by the angry audience, he finally woke up from his dream. Lying on the bed, Huaisher breathed heavily. He didn't know if this was a nightmare or a good dream. He just felt very complicated. Then he began to reflect on himself. Why did he come to the Golden Hall with such a broken thing? And what the hell was that evil smile? He was in a daze for a long time before he woke up. He got up from the bed and looked at the sunlight outside the window. After drinking a tube of wine, he ran to the garden and continued to daydream, until he realized that daydreaming was not a good idea. He took advantage of his free time today and changed his clothes. He carried a bucket, a mop, and a rag and began to clean. Of course, although it was called a cleaning, it was actually just a regular cleaning. The Chalcedony Hall was so big. Even if he didn't look at the 2 buildings that had been empty for a long time, just the 4 floors of the main hall were enough for him to clean up for a month. He just cleaned up the door, the front yard, the hall, and a few rooms that he often used. He pulled out some weeds, carried a bucket of water to the door, and polished the dusty sign of the Chalcedony Hall again. At noon, the tables, chairs, and glass that he bought online arrived. However, no matter what, the delivery boy was unwilling to deliver the goods. After putting the goods at the door, he ran away faster than a stray dog. Huaishir was so angry that he gave a negative review. The local furniture store did not say anything and directly refunded the delivery fee of 300 yuan. That was why people nowadays were willing to do anything just to be lazy. After putting everything away and replacing all the broken windows, the house finally looked a little more lively. At least it didn't look like a haunted house anymore. After resting for a while, Huaishir finally began to sigh. He picked up the broom and mop and went up to the 4th floor to clean up the master bedroom again. He swept away the dust, opened the windows for fresh air, washed the sheets and blankets, and hung them out. The rooms on the 4th floor aren't bad, and the beds aren't small either. Crow, who was watching the show, landed on the cabinet and looked around the elegant and warm room. Why are you always on the 3rd floor? Look, your bed is about to fall apart. Huaishir was silent for a moment before replying, "This is my parents' bedroom." Crow didn't know what to say. "Do you still think they'll come back?" "I don't know. Maybe they won't. Maybe they're still wandering around somewhere abroad. If they're a little wild, they might even have a new child." Huaishir sat on the chair and scratched his head. After a long time, he said helplessly, "But what if they come back, they can't not even have a place to stay, right? Have you ever thought of a possibility?" Huaishir, Crow looked at him with pity. "Your parents might have already—" "Huh?" Huaishir was at a loss. "No, nothing." Crow stared at him for a long time with a face full of disappointment. In the end, he didn't say anything and flapped his wings and flew away. Huaishir shrugged. After packing up his things, he closed the door and went downstairs. Then he lay on the sofa and played with his phone. He was addicted to mobile games, short videos, and the embrace of idiotic netizens. In the afternoon, when he looked down, he found that his chin seemed to be a little chubby. "I'm shocked." Huaishir jumped up from the sofa in fright and felt all over his body. There was indeed some chubby, but he was actually starting to get fat. The nature of the supplement is a high-calorie compound. Its purpose is to allow people to absorb as much heat as possible without any burden. That is, to get fat. In this regard, Crow was very calm. "You lie down and don't move every day. Isn't it normal for you to get fat? If you ask me, you should go out for a walk. And then get hit by someone." Huaishir's eyes widened. "When I go to school, someone sends me a bomb. If I go out on the street, I'm afraid there's a car full of RPGs waiting for me. It sounds like you're in trouble." Crow cackled. "So, are you going to run away? If you want to transfer schools, there's always a way, right? Why should I?" Huaishir rolled his eyes and glared at her. "This is my school. Why should I run away? Then, do you have any countermeasures?" She tilted her head and looked at Huaishir's face. She seemed to be curious. "Do you have any insights in your heart? Have you made any decisions? Why don't we buy a sniper rifle and take advantage of the night to shoot him from the back? Can we do that?" Huaishir's eyes widened. "Yes." Crow nodded. but you don't look like you have a hidden uncle who placed an order for you before his death so that you can start the game with godly equipment. Stop reading at the beginning. It's all fake. Weisher rolled his eyes. He finally understood what she meant. That author doesn't even want to write anymore, and he still has the nerve to say that it's finished in stages. Ha ha. He's been living off women on Weibo all day, and his writing is so poetic. He doesn't look like a decent person at all. After consuming a wave of outdated authors, Weisher propped himself up from the chair. After taking 2 deep breaths, he finally recovered a bit of energy and cooperated with Crow's physical examination today. It seems that the border material has a certain stimulating effect on your growth rate. Crow nodded with satisfaction. If this continues, your growth period can be shortened by at least half. And if you adjust your physical attributes from now on, your compatibility with the stigmata will also improve a lot. However, to avoid any accidents, I have to ask again. Does your family have any history of hereditary diseases? No. Weisher shook his head. Why do you ask? Very good. The growth period of a sublimator will subconsciously be adjusted according to the prototype in the Silver Ocean. If you have any latent diseases or hereditary diseases, it will be quite painful to make up for it. From today onwards, I will start to adjust the formula of your medicine, which may have a certain effect on your body. If there are signs of high fever, dizziness, or panic, you must tell me as soon as possible. Crow seemed to have said something important casually, and then handed over a tube of medicine. The color of today's medicine seemed to be a little thicker. If it was originally light green, it now looked like it was covered with a layer of shadow. After hesitating for a moment, Weisher drank it in one gulp. I've been on the pirate ship for so long, what's there to regret? Very good. Weisher. Very good. You will have a bright future, probably. Crow nodded with satisfaction and happily flipped open the Book of Destiny. Next, do you want to have another intense and exciting after-meal activity? Weisher rolled his eyes at her and sighed. He sprawled on the chair again and closed his eyes. Come on, don't take pity on me, because I'm a delicate flower. Ha ha. Crow smiled mysteriously. I like daring people like you. Since you're doing so well, I'll let you have a taste of meat today. Things seem to be branching out. Weisher's vision darkened again. Kill them all. Leave no one alive. First, he heard the instructor's voice in the headset. Then he felt the heavy weapon in his hand and the yellow sand blown by the wind. Outside the open window, the dry land kept flowing backward, and the dust in the air kept coming in with the singing from the radio. It was almost suffocating, but there was no cough in the car. It was as silent as a tomb. Weisher felt like he was playing a VR game, just like the ones the streamers often played, but the expensive game cabins were not affordable for most people. This was a fragment of the Red Glove's memory, a fragment selected from the broken records. Everything was just his past memory. Weisher just turned himself from a bystander into the protagonist, just like a lifelike, single-threaded RPG game. He saw more than a dozen people wearing the same uniform as him sitting on both sides of the car, expressionless under the sandstorm, like machines. Only the instructor's orders kept coming in the headset. Start the operation in 10 minutes. Team A and B will surround the targets from both sides. Leave no one alive. You hear me? Thus, the soldiers in the carriage responded with cheers. The car stopped at the end of the road, and the traces of a village could be vaguely seen in the distance. After so many simulation training, Weisher could at least keep up with their pace and distinguish the gestures and commands between each other. These guys' evaluation was too harsh. If they felt that his performance was too poor, even if he passed the exam, he would eventually be destroyed as an unqualified product. He really didn't know where the bastard Red Glove was serving. Looking at the surrounding scenery, It seemed to be a barren plateau area. He could vaguely distinguish the style of a desert country from the outline of the buildings, with the ruins of oil exploration sites on the road. Huaisher could tell that this was the southeastern area of Subterranean Sea, West Asia. It was most likely a narrow desert area between Rome and the Russian Federation. Because of the rich oil resources, wars had continued on this land. Dozens of large and small kingdoms were constantly at war under the interference of the Big Five, and there seemed to be no signs of stopping until now. So, the mission target this time should be the stronghold of the Russian Federation, right? Rome and the Russian Federation had been wrestling with each other for more than 1 or 2 years. It might be a bit too much to say that they were irreconcilable enemies, but if there was a chance to sabotage each other, both sides would never be soft-hearted. It seemed that this mission could be treated as a New Year's summon. He had cleared the game so many times. What was there to be afraid of? Huaisher gradually relaxed. He followed the rest of the team, lying in a hidden place and waiting for orders. Soon, gunshots rang out in the village not far away. Team A had already begun to exchange fire. It didn't take long for the instructor's order to come. Team B, attack. There was no need to shout any slogans. The soldiers who had been hiding for a long time got up and rushed to the village from all directions in groups of 2 or 3. Huaisher was mixed in with them. He deliberately fell one step behind to let his allies take the bullet for him, but the expected hail of bullets did not come at all. Even if there were occasional gunshots, there were only a few sporadic shots. It was as if they had been knocked out. Suddenly, he felt more relaxed. He mixed in with the team and fired 2 shots at the front. They rushed into the village in a mess. Under the order, he kicked open the broken door of the courtyard and raised his gun inside. Then he froze in place. Where is the enemy? Chapter 47. The moment the door was kicked open, he saw tobacco leaves casually piled up in the yard, tools in a mess, and dust everywhere. The color of the yellow soil seemed to cover everything, but he didn't see any enemies. He only saw a skinny woman trying to hide two girls behind her. Her eyes were wide open as she stared blankly at Huaishur. Her eyes were filled with fear. I'm sorry. He swallowed. I'm in the wrong place. He was about to turn around when he was kicked away by a teammate next to him. Then he heard the roar of an automatic rifle, a series of loud noises, and a faint scream. There was also the sound of blood spurting out. He didn't even have time to turn around. Someone seemed to be shouting something in the distance. Something flew through the air, followed by another loud noise. In the end, there was no sound. There was dead silence. There was only a sharp, buzzing sound in his ears. An RPG came out of nowhere and blew up everything into ruins. Huaishur subconsciously lay on the ground and crawled forward. Someone pulled him up and shouted something into his ear, but he couldn't hear clearly. He just followed the instructions of the captains and randomly pulled the trigger. He didn't even react when the magazine was empty. Then he saw corpses, women, children, old people, and children. Some were tall, some were short, some were fat, some were thin, some were whole, some were broken. The whole process was so fast that he didn't even react. He didn't even find where the enemy the instructor was talking about. The battle seemed to be over. Then he was dragged to the square by angry teammates and punched and kicked. In the intense dizziness and trance, the instructor came forward. The middle-aged man with a mustache looked down at him for a long time, then waved behind him. Someone dragged two struggling enemies forward. Then the instructor helped Huaishur up from the ground and gently patted the dust off him. The instructor put his gun in his hand and pointed at the screaming children on the ground and said something. Huaishur didn't hear clearly. He looked around blankly and saw the cold faces of his teammates. They saw a mess of corpses being dragged to the square and piled up into a mountain. The blood gathered in one place and formed a river. He still couldn't hear what the instructor said clearly, so his teammates slowly raised their guns and pointed them at him. He was stunned. The instructor finally spoke to him again. This time, Huaishur finally heard him clearly. He said, "Shoot." Huaishur subconsciously pulled the trigger at the enemy. Once, twice, thrice for times. Soon, the magazine was empty, and the two enemies on the ground turned into a pile of rotten meat. They no longer moved, and only blood bubbles continued to emerge from the bullet wounds, turning the dim yellow ground into a pitch-black color. At the very last moment, Huaishur finally saw her own face on top of the corpse. From the lifeless eyes of the two little girls. Huaishur opened his eyes in the room. Huaishur began to convulse violently. Huaishur roared something at the crow, and then Huaishur began to vomit. He bent down, lay on the ground, and vomited until tears were about to flow out. The first thing he felt was fear, then pain, followed by regret, and in the end, only anger and disgust were left. Deep anger and disgust at himself. He actually shot. To two little girls who didn't have any ability to resist. Damn it, he covered his face tiredly and couldn't help but want to cry. Damn it, even when he burned the red gloves to death, he didn't feel the slightest bit of emotion. But in this record of nothingness, he felt such a deep fear of death and an incomparably deep resistance to the act of killing. There were no enemies at all. Only old people who lost their sons in the war, women who lost their husbands, and children who lost their fathers. It was just a meaningless massacre. He actually shot. He clearly knew that it was just a record. And even if he was killed, there wouldn't be any problems, but he actually shot at two children who couldn't be considered enemies at all. Because of fear, confusion, or weakness? What did the red gloves do in the past? And what did he do? It seems that I was too eager for instant success, and the choice of the actual combat course was not appropriate. Crow looked at him pitifully. This is my fault, not yours. Rest for tonight. I'll adjust it tomorrow. No, just give me a few minutes. Huaishur interrupted her. A few minutes will be enough. Silence came. Soon, he finally calmed down, got up, and went to the bathroom, wiped the snot and saliva off his face, and returned to the hall. He said calmly, "Again." "Are you sure?" Crow asked suspiciously. "Again." Huaishur repeated, "Again." After a long time, Crow seemed to understand something and laughed. She said, "Okay." Things seemed to be branching out, and darkness came. Huaishur opened her eyes. She could smell the dust in the air, and there was a scorching wind blowing in from the window. The instructor issued an order from the front passenger seat. "Kill all of them. Don't leave a single one alive." Huaishur nodded and said, "Okay." Then he raised the muzzle, aimed at the driver's seat, and pulled the trigger. In the roar, the muzzle spewed out sparks. The driver was dead, and a ball of paste stuck to the broken window. The car suddenly twisted and rolled. Huaishur felt the wind blow beside him, and in the violent rolling, it seemed that a group of people had pounced on him. Soon, he was pinned to the ground by his teammates. The door of the back compartment opened. The instructor walked in with a blank expression and looked down at him. "Failed," he said, and pulled the trigger. Bang! Huaishur's head exploded. He opened his eyes, panting violently and sweating profusely. Soon, he picked up the warm water on the table and drank it in one gulp again. "Okay." Crow nodded, and darkness came again. "Kill all of them. Don't leave a single one alive." When he heard the instructor's voice, he suddenly smiled. He pulled out a dagger from his boot and lightly slit the neck of his teammate on the right. Blood spurted out from the broken neck and dyed the dust in the air red. Time seemed to have frozen. At that moment, Huaishur pulled out his gun and fired repeatedly. He aimed at his teammates on the front, back, left, and right, and pulled the trigger again and again. Balls of brain matter exploded one after another. But soon, he was killed again. "You need to pay attention to some strategy," Crow said. "In theory, it's possible for you to kill them all without any injuries, but I need to remind you that what you read is the Red Glove's record. That is to say, what happened and what everyone did was based on his subjective judgment. You understand?" "Not really." "It's okay, you'll understand soon." Crow retracted his gaze. Again, "Okay." Huaishur opened his eyes again. In the car, under the instructor's order, he twisted his body slightly, slowly moved his neck, and checked the equipment on his body. A military knife, a pistol, an automatic rifle, a bulletproof vest, a walkie-talkie, and a few magazines inserted into the rapid reaction vest, and an iron pomegranate. Weighing the heavy object in his hand, Huaishur met the eyes of his teammates and smiled. His little finger quietly pulled out the ring. He softly counted down. 3, 2, 1. At that moment, he flew out and crashed into the door of the rear compartment. He fell out of the speeding car in a sorry state and rolled on the ground. The thorns and shrubs on the side of the road pierced his body, and his hands were in great pain. But soon, he heard a roar behind him. The speeding transport car suddenly shook and jumped up a few centimeters from the ground. Then, the iron box expanded as if it was blown up, and blood-red fire spewed out from the broken crack. Soon, it twisted and deformed in the fire and stopped rolling. Huaishur got up from the ground and panted violently under the scorching sun. But soon, he saw that the twisted iron door in the burning wreckage suddenly made a sharp sound. It was kicked open by a foot in the passenger seat, The instructor, with a cold expression, slowly walked out and coldly looked at Huai Shi's stunned expression. He should have looked like an ordinary person, and there were no signs of source form or sacred mark on his body. But he survived the violent explosion without losing a single hair. What happened, what everyone did, is the subjective judgment of the red gloves. That's what you mean, right? Huai Shi couldn't help but laugh, mocking the red gloves guy. How much trauma do you have against your instructor? Otherwise, how could the instructor, who was obviously just an ordinary person, be unharmed in the explosion of the grenade? Did this guy think that his instructor was some kind of indestructible Iron King Kong? I really didn't expect that. 7794. The instructor looked at him indifferently and slowly twisted his neck. His fingers gently tapped the handle of the whip tied to his waist, making a sound that made Huai Shi's body suddenly tense. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of fingers tapping on the whip was a sign of torture and punishment. Once torture, twice serious injuries, and then there would be no third time. Huai Shi didn't know how many times he had seen his companions being whipped to death on the field. He actually felt the remaining despair and fear of the red gloves, and his will to resist quickly began to collapse. The instructor walked forward and looked down at his opponent, whose legs were trembling. He reached out and pressed his head. Twist. Crack. Huai Shi's neck was broken. Bang. Huai Shi opened his eyes angrily and slammed his fist on the table. Coward. He didn't know if he was scolding the red gloves or himself. After all, in the countless memories of training, he had deeply understood the coldness and cruelty of the instructor. It seems that you have understood the limitations of being a subjective recorder, right? Crow smiled strangely. Those who can't pull their perspective out of their own fear and confusion can't record everything as an absolute spectator. But this is the beauty of recording experience. It gives you the possibility to surpass the person being recorded. How do I do it? Huai Shi asked. It's very simple. Crow said, just destroy everything. No matter what happens, no matter what is stopping you, you just have to use your own way to get rid of them all. No matter how difficult the arcade is, there is always the possibility of being destroyed. One coin to clear the game is just the basics of the basics. On the contrary, speed and no injuries are what you should pursue. She paused and smiled slyly. How about it? If you feel that it's difficult, do you want to cheat? As long as it is recorded in the Book of Destiny, even if you want to modify yourself to be as omnipotent as a god, it will be easy. Forget it. Huai Shi rested for a while and felt that his energy had almost recovered. He rubbed his aching forehead and was ready to start, but Crow handed him a cigarette. Since you have such a backbone, I'll give you a free blue bottle. Chapter 48. Huai Shi froze for a moment and sniffed the handmade cigarette. It didn't even have a, but there seemed to be some kind of spice inside, which made him feel refreshed. Metal strengthens the body. Incense nourishes the soul. Crow calmly said, You'll get used to it in the future, but be careful not to use it for no reason. It'll be very troublesome if you get addicted. Apart from a very small number of Millennium incense, most incense stimulates the effect of origin substances, just like the upgraded version of Red Bull and cigarettes. If you abuse it, it's easy to become an idiot. Huai Shi nodded and didn't say anything else. After a moment, he looked at the origin substance on his fingertips that had dissipated and twisted his neck. Again. And so, darkness came. Soon, he opened his eyes again and sighed. Continue. Crow nodded. The long afternoon passed by in constant repetition. When he opened his eyes for the last time, the sky was already pitch black, and there was not a sound to be heard. Do you want to rest for a while? Crow asked. After all, you've reached your limit. One more. Huaisher finally understood the distress of heavy addicts. He rubbed his eyebrows and yawned. I'm about to get the hang of it. Okay, then, the last one? The last one. Huaisher nodded. And so, after a moment of absent-mindedness, he opened his eyes in the car and quietly listened to the orders from the front without saying a word. He even seized the last moment and closed his eyes to sleep for a while. Call me when we're there. He patted the shoulder of his teammate next to him affectionately. Not long after, the car stopped outside the village. He was rudely kicked awake. Huaisher smiled unconcernedly, got up awkwardly, and set off behind his teammate. During the short period of hiding in the grass, he suddenly patted the shoulder of the person in front of him. His teammate turned around unhappily. Then he saw him expressionlessly reach out with a dagger and stab it into his own throat. Goodbye, Huaisher whispered softly. The color of blood soaked the dry earth and weeds. On the barren land, he crawled, groping in the direction of his other teammate. His movements were quick. When he crawled, he used all four of his limbs, just like a spider crawling through thorns. One by one, they enjoyed the thrill of beating up their teammates, according to the information reported through the walkie-talkie. This kind of backstabbing experience was really enjoyable. Huaisher actually felt that he was starting to get used to it. This beautiful moment lasted until the gunshots of Team A were heard from the front. He sighed and heard the alarm from the walkie-talkie. Someone had already noticed that something was wrong. After all, 4 or 5 people had not responded for more than 5 minutes. It seemed like he couldn't stay here any longer. He shook his head, sat on the ground, and pulled out a few small pomegranate bolts. After weighing them in his hands, he threw them out with all his might. The sound of explosions could be heard from afar. Gunshots rang out, and the bushes beside him were like weeds in a rainstorm, constantly trembling from the bullets. Huaisher sighed, lifted his sleeve to wipe the blood off his face, and stood up from the corpses of his teammates. His uniform had been dyed scarlet by the blood of his allies. There was a big red patch on his, but why do I look like a monkey with hemorrhoids? Huaisher complained to himself. He picked up his rifle and walked in the direction of the gunshots, shouting loudly, "Don't shoot, we're on the same side." Then he pulled the trigger at those stunned faces. He emptied one magazine without resistance, then another. He was shot in the shoulder, and it felt like a chisel had opened up a big hole. In the intense pain, he seemed to be unable to feel his left hand. "That's too much, old man. Why is your hand broken again?" Huaisher sighed, helplessly. "I haven't learned how to change magazines with one hand." He threw away the automatic rifle in his hand, pulled out his pistol, and walked toward the village. 7794. "What are you doing?" An angry roar came from the walkie-talkie. "Of course I'm beating up my teammates. Friend, don't you know? I choose Black Lily, you choose Demigod. We can rebuild the empire together." But there was no sound from the walkie-talkie. There was only gloomy silence until the instructor's cold voice sounded. "Mission change, clear 7794. They were focused on. Don't make a decision so quickly." Huaisher sighed. Before the channel was cut off, he raised the walkie-talkie and said tentatively, "I think I can still be saved." Bang! Huaisher tilted his head subconsciously and saw the walkie-talkie in his hand explode into a pile of trash in the air. A sniper's bullet, under the strong reminder of the premonition of death. He crawled and quickly crawled into the tangled alleys of the village. He heard footsteps coming from all directions. He counted silently in his heart. In the original car, 7 on the left were Team B, 6 on the right were Team A, and including himself, there were 13 people. And now, under the backstab of the traitor, 6 of the 7 Team B were dead. They were completely wiped out. Logically speaking, after side B of the tape was played. Side A would be played, but side A had not been played yet, and Weischer felt that he would be played by side A. Fortunately, he was not far away. He gestured in the direction, raised his pistol, and pointed at the daredevil in front of him. After falling to the ground, he casually fired 2 more shots. He took out the magazine and looked at it. There were 6 bullets left, 1 for each person. No way, he was not a sharpshooter. In this kind of chaotic battle, it would be lucky if he could hit 1 person with 6 shots. Maybe he could try shooting randomly with 5 shots. If these 5 shots were not enough to kill the 6 people on the opposite side, 1 shot was enough to kill 2 people, then the remaining shot would be enough to give him a quick death. An unyielding death without suffering any humiliation. That sounded too romantic. The footsteps in the distance gradually faded. He took 2 steps and jumped over the wall out of the alleyway. After experiencing so many reincarnations of death, he had grasped some of the rules. Compared to the malicious level design of today's VR games, this kind of setting that could reduce the difficulty as long as there was a backboard was too benevolent. Then, in the courtyard behind the wall, he saw the pair of frightened eyes again. The stooped woman was still looking at the sky. Her eyes were dull. She tried in vain to hide the 2 skinny children behind her, but they were now dead, lying on the ground with bullet holes and blood on their bodies. Dust fell from the wind and covered the empty eyes. "Why is it you guys again?" Weischer was stunned for a moment. He scratched his head and wanted to say something, but he did not know what to say. He knew that this was a record, and these were all fake NPCs, but he still felt an indescribable sense of shame. This was not a game. "I'm sorry." Weischer lowered his head and did not dare to look at the dust-covered eyes. He said, "I'm going out now." Weischer slammed the door open and rushed into the road. He stabbed the barrel of his gun into the eye of an opponent. "Go to hell!" Bang! A ball of blood burst out from the back of the person's head. He did not have time to look around. He ran for his life and staggered as he tried to get as far away from the courtyard as possible. But he could not forget that pair of eyes. When he began to treat all of this as a game, the countless deaths in the records woke him up from his dream. This was not a game. This was a record, a history of the past. History that once happened in a corner of this world. Insignificant massacres and insignificant deaths. They were all dead. Those eyes that had lost their luster were gradually covered by dust, buried, forgotten, and not even qualified to be remembered by people. Weischer staggered and ran, wearily moving forward in the cracks. After kicking open a door, he finally arrived at his destination. In the room, the old man curled up in the corner seemed to be frightened and subconsciously hugged the thing in his arms tightly. "Let go." Weischer leaned against the door frame, panting, and raised the pistol. "Give that to me." That person said something, hesitated for a moment, and then let go of his hand. Weischer suppressed him and forced him to the ground. "Thank you." Weischer panted, picked up the thing, staggered back 2 steps, and turned to leave. But after taking 2 steps, he could not help but turn back and shout behind him, "Don't worry, I will save you." No one responded. The people in this village were probably already dead. He could not save a single person. Damn it. Weischer raised his arm and rubbed the corner of his eyes. He cursed in a low voice. Damn it. Then he heard the roar of the door in the courtyard breaking. The sound of automatic rifles sounded like a storm plowing through every inch of space. Weischer curled up behind the stone mill and heard the sound of gravel flying above his head. He took a deep breath and tried to calm down in the smell of smoke. Then Weischer got up, picked up the RPG on his shoulder, and tried to show his teammates his brightest smile. "Hey, how are you guys?" Then he pulled the trigger. Justice reigns from above. Boom! In the violent shock and impact, fire and smoke rose into the sky. The boiling blood mist filled the air and danced with the dust. Finally, it turned into fine rain and fell on the wall and the ground. And Huaishur's body. Silence reigned. Huaishur threw down the launcher in his hand, crossed the messy courtyard and streets, and walked to the center of the village. He walked to the man, waiting there. The instructor seemed to be surprised by this result. He stood there with his hands behind his back for a moment. Soon, he raised his hand, took off the sunglasses on his face, and threw them on the ground. Although they are all semi-finished products, they were all wiped out here. I didn't expect you to have guts. 7794. The pair of gray eyes stared coldly at Huaishur's face. Then he hooked his finger at the teenager. It seems that I need to teach you another lesson. Same to you. Huaishur twisted his neck, threw away the holster, and the quick reaction vest that hindered him. He pulled out a military knife with one hand and put on a posture completely different from the opponent. Unlike the fighting techniques of the Roman military, it was a classic posture from Doomsday. It was the kind of beginner style that even the instructor almost didn't recognize. Come, Huaishur grinned. Watch me beat you up with military boxing. Very good. The instructor seemed to understand something. His face gradually turned pale. The joints of his body rubbed together, and he said in a low voice, Very good, 7794. I promise before you die, you will experience what hell is. Chapter 49. In that instant, the sound of something shattering could be heard. Immediately afterwards, the wind howled. As he swung his fist, his right arm suddenly swelled. The pulsing muscles seemed to expand, as if they were inflated. In the blink of an eye, countless knotted muscles seemed to have enlarged his arm by several times, revealing an almost deformed and sinister appearance. As Huaishur dodged, the fist slammed into the ground. The entire plaza suddenly shook. It was as if it had been struck by a tank's main cannon. Was this a change brought about by the Red Glove's past fear in the records, or was it something else? Huaishur had no interest in finding out. He had died to the instructor's form more than once or twice. Bullets, guns, and explosives had no effect at all. It was like a nightmare in a nightmare. In the Red Glove's memories, this instructor, who had cruelly forged him into a weapon, was a symbol of invincibility. His strength had been artificially magnified, like a monster. If it weren't for the fact that the Red Glove was incomparably certain that this instructor was just a normal person, Huaishur guessed that the instructor's transformation right now was probably a transformation, growing bat wings and goat horns, casually casting a forbidden spell to destroy the heavens and earth. Fortunately, this degree of transformation wasn't too exaggerated for Huaishur. He reached out and touched the blood on the ground. Confining hand. This was the first time he had tried this technique. He had just mastered in the records. As the origin substance flames rose from his fingertips, the blood began to stir as if it was boiling. A gray aura constantly rose from within. Who knew how many corpses and blood rose into the air like a thick fog, enveloping the entire plaza. Even though he didn't know why his soul had been named Confining Hand by the Silver Ocean, Huaishur was very clear about its nature. It was a relatively rare transformation type among the various major categories, and it spanned across the two major categories, spirit and matter, and its range was origin substance and iron. In other words, he could build a bridge between the origin substance, which represented the soul's foundation, and the matter substance, which existed in the widest amount of iron, allowing the two to transform at will. It could be said to have a wide range of uses. That formless axe was the weapon that Huaishur had created when he had placed all the uneasiness and killing intent he had accumulated over the past 7 years into the origin substance. And now, Huaishur was using the sealing hand as a foundation to once again attempt to convert the origin substance in the outside world. As a result, countless pieces of rusty iron sand that were hard to distinguish with the naked eye rose from the blood. That was the essence of destruction, the ashes condensed by death. Accompanied by the dry wind and dust, they were deposited in the pungent smell of blood and smoke, quickly rising and spreading in the blink of an eye. All despair and pain equally to everything. In that instant, a hoarse roar and angry roar came from within the dark fog. The wind howled and expanded, but it couldn't blow away the fog that was between origin substance and matter. A savage shadow charged at Huaishur and punched out. Huaishur dodged to the side and swung the dagger in his right hand horizontally, leaving a terrible wound on the huge deformed arm. Then the dagger turned around and stabbed towards the instructor's neck. Bang! The dagger sank into his raised arm and collided with the bone. The sound was like steel colliding with steel. He felt the heavy breathing of a vicious beast erupt from the instructor's chest. The panting caused by such a violent power caused him to suck in large mouthfuls of the ashes in the air into his body. Under the stimulation of pain and despair, his anger became even more frenzied. Like a wild beast, Huaishur gripped the military knife tightly and stared at the instructor's face through the deformed arm. How does it feel to be in despair that you personally created? His smile was mocking. I'm already used to it. What about you? Bang! The huge arm swept past and actually let out a low rumble that broke through the air. The wind almost blew Huaishur 3 steps away, but then Huaishur once again pounced on the instructor that he originally couldn't defeat. His smile was savage. He felt as if he was drunk. It was as if he was in a deep trance, at the same time incomparably sober. Then he felt a fanaticism. It was a kind of indescribable freedom. It was as if he was welcoming a release after extreme anger. When he breathed, the ashes in the air were sucked into his lungs. He inhaled the pain of the dead and became one with their despair. It was as if he had combined with countless deaths. He went from being the recorder and the recorded to being one of the records. He could feel the pain brought by the countless deaths at the same time, and was also immersed in the despair of dying in a massacre. It was as if the souls of those people were standing here side by side with him. Then, the nothingness of death turned into a flame that boiled in his chest. After mixing with his anger, his unwillingness, and his will, it turned into an inexplicable impulse that erupted from the inside out and engulfed him. It urged him to face his opponent, to deliver punishment, and to bring about true death. Then, under the tight grip of the hand of confinement, the gray flame rose from the blade. It was a color that was far grayer and paler than the ashes of the calamity. It was a pure thing that was refined, extracted, and sublimated from countless despair and pain. It was a pure poison. It was a poison extracted from the records of self-death. It was a death that was condensed from the extremely condensed ashes of the calamity. Although it was not harmful to the physical body, once contaminated, it would undoubtedly bring the pain of death to the spirit of the victim, just like Huaishur had experienced countless times. At that moment, the words in the Book of Destiny quietly changed. It was not only the level of army boxing that was rapidly increasing, but a new branch quietly appeared under the sole introduction of Confinement Hand. It was a sole application that was recognized by the Book of Destiny. Heart poison. Yes, that's it. Blood for blood. A tooth for a tooth. Crow stared at the young man immersed in madness in the record and seemed to laugh happily, represent death, and take revenge on the beasts in the dark canyon. This is your destiny. Huaishur, the last guardian of the kingdom of heaven. At that moment, Huaishur's dagger slashed down. The deformed instructor roared in pain. His huge arm smashed down as if it had broken Huaishi's left arm that he could not feel. He did not waver at all. He still walked forward step by step, almost forgetting himself. He looked at the distorted face closely. His pitch-black eyes were filled with pure darkness. Then the military knife slashed down again. Bang! It was a light military knife, but at this moment, under the control of the confinement hand, it made a heavy sound as if it was a heavy axe. An incredible weight emerged from it. With Huaishi's swing, the enemy's tendons were cut off again, and the enemy's flesh and blood were torn apart. The sound of bones breaking was like firewood being smashed by a huge axe. The instructor roared, clenched his fist, and opened his huge fingers to grab at Sui Xiong's face. But in the next moment, as the military knife slashed down, the iron-colored palm was cut off from the index finger and the ring finger. It was cut in half. The blade was deeply wedged into his wrist. In the intense pain, he saw Huaishi take a deep breath. Then he roared and moved forward. Thunder burst forth. Following the sudden shattering of the military knife, origin flames surged out from within and transformed into the outline of a sharp blade. It moved forward inch by inch like a hot knife through butter, easily splitting the entire arm into two equal halves from the middle. Then the burning dagger was raised again and slashed down. The deformed arm fell from the instructor's shoulder to the ground. Blood spurted out from the crack and fell on the square that had been spilled countless times. Together with those pained old men, despairing women, and ignorant children, their blood gathered in one place, turning into the same dim color on the desolate land. The instructor pushed him away with all his strength, but he could not stabilize his body. He staggered back and fell to the ground. But Huaishi moved forward, panting. He staggered over one corpse after another, walked in front of pairs of lifeless eyes, and left the red outline in their lost spirit. "Thanks to you, I've finally understood one thing," he murmured softly, suddenly raised his foot, and stepped on the instructor's chest. He pressed him to the ground again and let him struggle in vain. Finally, he raised the dagger and aimed it at the instructor's neck from afar. The reason why I chose to become a sublimator, as if saying goodbye, Huaishi solemnly stared at the distorted face and said to him word by word, "You're right," is to chop off the head of a bastard like you. In that instant, as the blade slashed down, a deep crack was left in the ground. Blood gushed out from the neck of the headless corpse. It flowed through the crack and poured into the dried-up wasteland. It brought rare moisture to this dead land, leaving behind a glimmer of hope that it could wait for the flowers to bloom in the coming year. Then, Huaishi saw the whole world shake. Everything shattered. He sank into the darkness. Soon, he woke up from the chair. He only felt that he was sweating profusely. It was as if he was about to collapse. It was extremely uncomfortable, but for some reason, his heart felt calm and satisfied. It was as if he had just received his reward from the hypocritical revenge just now. Congratulations on breaking through. Crow stood on the table and looked at him. "Did you get anything?" Huaishi was silent. He didn't know how to answer. In the end, he didn't do anything. It wasn't a rescue, nor was it a revenge. Perhaps as early as 10 years ago, everything had already ended. What he did was that he was not happy with the original plot, so he tore up the original work and wrote a doujinshi of his own. What did he get? After pondering for a moment, he chuckled softly. "A beautiful dream. At least there's a beginning and an end." As he said that, he supported himself on the table and slowly got up. When he saw the dagger that he originally put on the table, he couldn't help but pick it up, casually played with it twice in his hand, and then threw it back on the table. As for the rest, just treat it as a consolation egg. After that, he didn't look at anything else and turned to go upstairs. After a whole day, he felt that he was dizzy and his vision was turning black. He was about to die from exhaustion. In this world, there was nothing more beautiful than a complete sleep. If there was, then he would sleep twice. Go to bed early. He waved his hand and closed the bedroom door. Crow watched the young man's figure disappear up the stairs. He turned around and looked at the table. Under the dim light of the table lamp, the cheap dagger was faintly iron-colored. It was nailed to the cracked and peeling paint of the long table, drawing a slender shadow. And at the place where the tip of the dagger was nailed, there was a tragic scar. It was like an axe. Good night. Why, sure. Sleep. Crow spread his wings and flew into the hazy night outside the window. He disappeared. Chapter 50. A Fat Otaku's Happy Dream. Perhaps it was the increase in his power that made his heart feel more secure. He no longer had the strange dream of going to Vienna's Golden Hall to play the little widow visits a grave. After he woke up, he sat in the garden and practiced for 2 hours as usual. Huaishe received a call from AI Ching. Go out now and wait at the door. Someone will come and fetch you. She said, we have found Wang Hai's trail. In fact, without the need for the country's machinery, even with the help of the Xian Hai Special Affairs Division, they were able to sift through the whole of Xian Hai. With AI Ching's surveillance through the Astronomy Society and the channel among the normal people, the two sides started to cooperate, and the whole of Xianhai became a glass fish tank. Everything was clear. Under his crazy provocation, in just one day's time, almost all the foreign migrants were exposed. After the local people with criminal records were dragged out and beaten several times through the ubiquitous surveillance and investigation, they finally found Wang Hai's trail. In a deserted mountain outside the city, inside a manor that had been abandoned for many years. In other words, the second place on the Xianhai haunted house ranking after Huaisher found out about this. He almost laughed out of anger. What the F***, CK? What are you planning? Are you trying to steal my first place on the haunted house ranking? After confirming the traces of Wang Hai's entry and exit through the surveillance cameras, the Special Affairs Division was already in full swing. Countless macho men sharpened their knives and jumped into the cars, ready to go. It seemed that Division Chief Fu was really angered by the bomb. After Huaisher arrived, he was shoved into AI Ching's car, and they headed out of the city. In less than half an hour, Huaisher, who was stuffed into a bulletproof vest and wearing a helmet, arrived at the foot of a deserted mountain in a daze. The satellite has finished its investigation. There are traces of human activity in the manor. The person who was sent to investigate the scene came back to report. There is a target that has a high chance of matching Wang Hai's body shape, but it is uncertain. Should we get on the drone? Drones are too easy to spot. Director Fu looked through the binoculars for a long time and began to discuss the attack plan with his men according to the manor's map. As a member of the Astronomical Society and the only sublimata fighter, Huaisher was also stuffed into the list of the first batch to enter the manor. He was still trembling. How do I use this thing? Where's the insurance? He tried to pretend that he didn't recognize the automatic rifle in his hand and wanted to escape by a fluke. In the end, he was tied up in the car by the hunks. Wait, I'm a victim too. Why do I have to participate in the attack? He clung to the door, unwilling to go up. He cried loudly, even if you want to find our ascendant, go find Old Lou. Old Lou's ability was so powerful. I'm just a cello player. All I can do is conjure up an axe to embarrass myself. Can you please let me go? What the F*** CK? Don't hit people. Don't hit people's faces. I've done great things for Xianhai. I've shed blood for the Astronomy Association. I want to see AI Ching. I want to see AI Ching. AI Ching, who sat in the car, moved her gaze away expressionlessly. She couldn't help but sigh. Oh well, let him come with me. Director Fu couldn't stand it anymore. He waved his hand to signal for his men to stop arguing. If they continued, this *** would start yelling things like, the Special Affairs Division is beating people up. TSK, what were young people thinking these days? So, Yu Dongri was such a good person. As long as his sentence was reduced, he was willing to go to the lion's den. If he had known, he would have arrested the ** and sent him to jail for a few years. He sighed and lowered his head to look at the blueprint on the table. The abandoned manor on the mountain had been around for many years. Actually, there were many abandoned buildings like this around Xianhai. Most of them were built during the golden age of Xianhai's economy more than 90 years ago. As the economy declined, the number of rich people dwindled, and the nearby real estate industry declined as well. Who knew how many houses under construction had been turned into unfinished buildings? Even now, there was still a Long Ma building in the old city that hadn't been completed. Calculating the time, it was around the same time as the Stone Marrow Museum. However, this place no longer had unlucky people like Huaisher to guard it. Instead, it had long been abandoned by the wind and rain. Only a few graveyard keepers at the back of the mountain had slightly modified the few houses to serve as accommodation. Later, due to the rumors of ghosts, Even the graveyard had been abandoned, and the place had completely fallen into ruin. Now, based on the surveillance from the satellite, there were several traces of activity at the old manor. Other than Wang Hai, there might be other ascendants. The last backbone of the Salvation Society was probably hiding there. There might even be reinforcements sent by the organization behind the scenes. Once he thought about what kind of crazy person was trying to stir up trouble in Xanhai, he couldn't help but have a headache. Is everything ready? After confirming it several times, Director Fu also checked the weapons and bulletproof vests that he carried with him. Then, he led the way into the car of the first batch of commandos. We're starting the operation just like that. Regarding this, AI Ching was confused. Very soon, she raised her hand to signal. Wait a minute, let me make a call. At the same time, inside the abandoned manor on the mountain, inside the ruins of the main building that was about to collapse, a shadow was crawling behind the broken wall. He was using a telescope to look down the mountain. Are you sure the guy from the astronomy club will take the bait? The spy held the phone and was rather agitated. We've been waiting here for 2 days already. How come there is no sign of him at all? Don't worry, he'll be here soon. Wang Hai's voice came from the phone. I purposely went to the city to take a look. If there is still no sign of him, the Special Affairs Division will be dissolved. This time, God has given you the last chance, the spy said unhappily. The spy said unhappily, think about how to atone for your crime. I don't see the use of catching a little brat. As he spoke, he whistled twice in a low voice to pacify the shadows hiding in the ruins. Those beasts were restless, as if they had smelled fresh blood. It's easier to negotiate with a hostage. What do you know? Wang Hai's voice on the phone became unhappy. If we're lucky, we might be able to wipe out the astronomy club in Xanhai. Then, what plan won't work? They've gone up the mountain, and there's also the army from the Special Affairs Division. Don't let anything happen to you. For Ascendants, 10 shadow beasts and 90 retribution demons. Even if the army from the Special Affairs Division is here, it won't end well. The spy revealed a bloodthirsty smile. I'd like to see if that cowherd and that female cripple are as powerful as you make them out to be. Pa, the call was cut off. The strange shadow curled up in the darkness and retracted all of his presence like a hibernating snake. The whole manor was instantly silenced, and there was no sound. The chirping of birds and insects appeared again, and it made the ruins look even more eerie. The speeding motorcade came to an abrupt stop halfway up the mountain. At the base, at the foot of the mountain, someone moved out a mortar. Following the direction of the command, it roared. Soon, the cannonballs fell from the sky and blasted the entire eastern side of the manor into dust. Amidst the flying dust, a giant crater was exposed on the ground. There was still no movement, but the sound of panicked screams could be heard coming from inside the manor. Should we continue? Division Head Fu, who was sitting in the passenger seat with a pair of binoculars, asked. Wait a minute. AI Ching, who was in the car, looked up at the manor. She raised her phone expressionlessly and said to the other end, I need a longsword for cleaning. 3 minutes later, there was a shrill wail in the sky. The black shadow of a steel bird broke through the clouds and flew across the ground at supersonic speed. Under the wings of the bird, a pure white steel arrow drew an arc in the air and landed on the ground. At that moment, the shadow on the rooftop widened his eyes in shock. What the hell? There was a bang. The thing landed on the ground. In the next moment, there was a violent roar and flames rising from the ground. The entire mountain shook slightly amidst the gushing flames and the sweeping air pressure. The ruined manor once again wailed and groaned under the violent ravages. Amidst the terrifying explosion, the sweeping air pressure completely crushed the entire manor into ruins. Countless steel shards scattered death in all directions, and sharp sounds kept bursting out from them. A huge depression appeared in the middle of the manor. The lava soil flowed on the blackened ground, and the stench of smoke and dust spread in the violent wind. Missile! There was no time to react. A low, whistling sound burst out from the sky again. The shadow of the steel bird came back. After throwing something in the air, it flew to the end of the line of sight. There was only a dull sound that spread in the air. Immediately after, white smoke extended towards the ground along with something. It was like a tree that grew upside down. It was as if a cruel angel had dropped its wings from the clouds. Holy light and pure, white smoke covered the ground, bringing about equal burning and destruction. The terrifying temperature burst forth the moment those darn things landed. Green and red flames spewed out from them. The scorching hot, febrile wind enveloped every corner. It was like a thin layer of white gauze. Everything that it enveloped was enveloped by the terrifying flames. The flames danced wildly in the soil, on the stones, on the ruins, and on the flesh. The temperature that was enough to burn steel into liquid brought about poisonous smoke and thick fog that destroyed the lungs. It only took an instant for the destruction brought by the white phosphorus incendiary bomb to completely descend on the ruins. The dancing white phosphorus vapor and the surging flames permeated every inch of the place. Burn, burn, burn. First, there was the terrifying impact of the missile. Then, there was the terrifying temperature of the white phosphorus. Finally, there was the poisonous fog that completely destroyed all living things. The entire mountain was shrouded in destruction. On the mountainside, everyone stared dumbfoundedly at this scene of destruction. They watched as dozens of ghostly creatures that were several meters tall screamed and escaped from the flames. They struggled and rolled on the ground, scraping the green flames off their white bones. However, soon after, vicious flames reignited from their bone marrow. In the end, they crawled on the ground and stopped moving. Only the remains of their bodies that slowly turned into charcoal in the flames and the sound of bones breaking in the burning. The group of people looked at the ruins in front of them in shock. Director Fu turned to look at AI Ching. You don't want them to live? Weren't the white phosphorus incendiary bombs banned? Those who can live are the ones who live. AI Ching calmly waved her hand. There must be something wrong with people who talk about humanitarian when facing terrorists. Okay, you can go now. AI Ching ordered. Finally, she looked at Huai Shi. You can go now. You will go, right? Yes, yes, yes. Huai Shi nodded like he was pounding garlic. I am a brick of the Astronomical Association. I will go wherever I am needed. Men, bring me my fire Kirinake. Chapter 51. Soon, Huai Shi, who was armed with an automatic rifle and a gas mask, was kicked out of the car. He followed the muscular brothers of the Sublimator Suppression Force into the manor that was still burning. As far as the eye could see, it was a white land. In the wasteland and ruins that had been burned to ashes, huge monsters could be seen constantly, whether it was the still horribly hard scales or the hideous skeletons. They seemed to have come from hell, no matter how one looked at it. It didn't look like a strange appearance that could be formed by natural evolution. Other than that, there was only dead silence in the manor. The further they went, the colder Huai Shi's heart became. What the hell were these bastards hiding here? Even now, there were still wisps of black gas slowly rising from the white ashes and dissipating in the air. The strong soldiers wearing gas masks seemed to be unable to withstand the pressure here. Their legs went weak, and they staggered to the ground. Their teammates hurriedly dragged them out of the field to receive first aid. But Huaisher seemed to be fine. Not only did he not feel any discomfort, but he was also very conscious. His body's reaction speed and perception began to become more sensitive. Abyssal sediment. This place has been transformed into a feeding ground. The concentration of the sediment in the abyssal abyss is even higher than at the border. In response, AI Ching replied in the communication. Appropriate pressure will make your soul circulate faster, just like diving. But for ordinary people who haven't cast their souls, this sediment is highly toxic. This is the favorite trick of the cultists. Huaisher picked up the rifle and looked around carefully. What are they trying to do? Who knows? Maybe they want to play a big game. AI Ching's tone was calm. Once the main force enters here, they will use the mark bestowed by God to increase the depth of this place. It's like stuffing us into the stomach of something. The black gas you see is equivalent to gastric juice. When the time comes, it will be slowly digested. Huaisher's hair stood on end. He shrunk his neck and became more and more vigilant. Although the Special Affairs Division was powerful, it was still within the system after all. There were many inconveniences. At most, they would use a few rounds of mortars. Even if she was a terrorist, who would have thought that there would be such a lame woman in the decision-making level who had such an abnormal brain circuit that she would release a missile just because of a disagreement? They were still in China. What are you doing? Not only the Allies, but even the spirits of those unlucky bastards in heaven would be puzzled. Fortunately, AI Ching's heavenly justice and white phosphorus incendiary bombs had cleansed the place thoroughly. Not a single bug was left in the manor. Even if there were some rotten fish and prawns that were not killed by the explosion, their lungs would be burned by the poisonous gas, and they would fall to the ground. Huaisher saw a hideous corpse in the innermost layer of the ruins. It seemed to have been in the range of destruction when the missile exploded. Half of its body was charred, but it did not die on the spot. Instead, it struggled to escape. Then, he was engulfed by the white phosphorus incendiary bombs that fell from the sky. He was burned alive in the flames that were like maggots in a tarsal bone, turning into a pile of twisted charcoal. One could vaguely make out a beast-like face. Half of the face was charred and half broken, revealing a broken skull like that of an ape. Its teeth were huge and sharp, but after a slight knock with the barrel of a gun, it broke into two pieces. Although you have science and I have magic, it was proven that magic could not beat science. Although it was not clear what level the Ascendant was or what kind of strange stigmata it had, in the present realm, it could not withstand the suppression of the steel torrent. It was said that in the old magic era, everything was not like this. But with the establishment of the 3 major blockades in the present realm, it became more and more difficult for the Ascendants to mess around in the present realm. As for the details, Crow said that he would tell Huaisher after he officially implanted the stigmata, but before that he did not take the initiative to mention anything. It was probably a secret that had been hidden. After Huaisher made one last check that there were no hidden dangers, he waved his hand behind him. A few soldiers wearing chemical protective suits carried a huge box over and neatly threw the corpse into the box, sealed it, and took it away. The body of the Ascendant was also valuable. Even if it was burned into a piece of charcoal, it might still be able to decompose the remains of the stigmata, and through an autopsy, it might be able to directly identify the Ascendant's identity. Unfortunately, the burning of the incendiary bomb was too thorough, and the corpse was smashed into pieces as soon as it touched the ground. It was impossible to piece it back together. Huaisher continued to move forward, but after 2 steps, he felt that something was wrong, so he stepped back and bent down to wipe the white ashes on the ground. Through the ashes on the ground that had not yet dissipated, he saw the light of metal, and as he continued to dig, he could distinguish the outline of steel. It was a short sword. The guard had been burned out of shape, but the bracelet on the hilt was also almost charred, but the body of the sword was still intact, except that it was covered with a layer of black charcoal. It was about 40 centimeters long and 5 centimeters wide, with a single-edged blade. It looked like some kind of ceremonial weapon, but when Huaishir tried to cut it, it felt very smooth. It did not seem like a good thing. He weighed it in his hand and felt that it was not an ordinary object. "It's a relic from the border." Crow's voice mysteriously sounded in his ear. "It should be the result of digging in the 7th or 8th level of hell. And looking at the style, it's a sacrificial knife used by the Tenochtitlan Empire for live sacrifice. Good stuff." Crow, who was hiding in the shadow, looked at him sneakily, his small eyes blinking. "Can you find a way to steal it? Where did you come from? And what the hell are you thinking?" Huaishir asked through the Book of Destiny. "There are people watching behind. How can I hide? Isn't it common to steal equipment in a group?" Crow shrugged. "Also, be careful behind you." At that moment, a gust of wind broke through the air. A chill ran down the back of his head. Huaishir did not hesitate, and the sacrificial knife in his hand blocked behind him, and only heard a sharp noise. His whole body was almost sent flying by the huge force. Fortunately, he was no longer the rookie he used to be, and with a somersault in the air, he turned around and landed, already facing behind him. Then, he saw the figure slowly emerging from the air. The first thing he saw was sticky blood dripping from the charred body, and with the movement of the muscles, countless small bright red cracks appeared on the charred skin. Then, he saw countless charred skins slowly peeling off. It was like a snake shedding its skin. It broke free of the old shell and death. It welcomed a new life. In the painful convulsions, the burned dead skin fell off the body bit by bit, but the new skin did not seem to have time to grow, only revealing a layer of bloody and twisted face, and a pair of venomous eyes. Huaishir sucked in a cold breath. "Brother, do you want me to call an ambulance for you?" That was what he said, but his body was not honest at all. He threw away the sacrificial knife in his hand, picked up the automatic rifle, and shot forward. Within 10 meters, he accurately controlled the gun, emptying a magazine in a few seconds, and then skillfully pulled out a new one from the back of the rapid reaction vest, changed the magazine with one hand, and continued to shoot. What a joke! If he did not shoot, would he wait for the other party to come over and stab him a few more times? Huaishir was not confident that he could go head-to-head with this kind of powerhouse who could survive the incendiary bomb. How could he win? Let's shoot first and talk later. After the training in the Book of Destiny, Huaishir did not dare to call himself the Gun King, but he was no longer the rookie who did not even know how to control the gun. Changing the magazine with one hand, which he had learned this morning, almost made the eyes of the suppression team behind him pop out. "Soon, Takeshi, you still say you don't know martial arts." As early as Huaishir pulled the trigger, the strange figure tried to dodge. Perhaps he did not expect Huaishir to react so quickly, and did not even take the border relics in his hand. When he saw Huaishir throw something, he subconsciously pounced forward, trying to snatch the weapon back. But bullets were always faster than people, and in an instant, 20 steel core bullets pierced through him, turning him into a bloody gourd, and the ground was covered in strange green blood. While Huaishir was reloading, he had already rolled and crawled into the broken wall behind the ruins. The strong men behind the suppression team were not incompetent. At first, they were stunned for a moment, but when they reacted, a hail of bullets rained down, almost turning the broken wall into a sieve. Huaishir changed the magazine, took the time to pick up the border relics from the ground, and casually inserted it into his vest. He was not in a hurry to check the results behind the wall. He reached into the pockets of his allies and took out a few iron sweet potatoes, pulled out the bolts, and threw them out with all his might. Before the sound of the explosion could be heard, a shadow shot out from behind the broken wall, screaming shrilly, and pounced straight at Huaishir. Bang! Huaishur subconsciously pulled out his sword to block and felt the military knife in his hand break from the middle. He took the opportunity to fall on his back and felt something cold brush past his face. It was bone-chilling. It was a sharp bone spur. The chaotic gunfire stopped abruptly, and the soldiers who surrounded him fell to the ground as if they had lost all their strength. Even through the gas mask, Huaishur still smelled a sweet fragrance, and his vision blurred. Poison. He raised his hand and threw out a handful of ash, forcing the shadow to retreat. When he got up from the ground, he felt weak. It was only now that he finally saw the true face of the intruder. After the baptism of missile bombardment and incendiary bombs, the man looked like he had shed a layer of skin, and a layer of pink scales could be vaguely seen under the new skin. There were 3 strange horns on his forehead, and they were actually of 3 different colors. What the hell? Don't be a coward. Kill him. Crow's voice sounded in his ear, encouraging him. The crying snake's stigmata is only level 2, and it can only survive because it has a strong soul. That poison is not as strong as the one I feed you every day. Can you King shut up? Huaishur was furious. And what exactly do you feed me every day? Before he could angrily rebuke that bastard, the crying snake had already pounced on him again, the bone spur in his hand stabbing straight at Huaishur's throat. His movements were swift and fierce, and his speed was astonishing. However, his posture seemed to be making Huaishur laugh. Bro, can you do it? Huaishur easily dodged the sudden attack and suddenly pulled out the sacrificial knife in front of his chest. The handle of the knife turned in the air, and his 5 fingers turned upside down as he stabbed downwards. The 2 figures passed by each other, and before Huaishur could stand firm, he heard a mournful scream behind him. From the shoulder to the back, the crying snake's body had been cut open by the sacrificial knife, revealing the color of the bones below. When the sacrificial knife saw blood, the layer of ash on it seemed to have been washed away, revealing the bronze color below. The flowing blood seemed to have been absorbed by the blade, and it gathered on the blade, moving thread by thread. However, the wound caused by the knife did not bleed at all. Instead, it dried up like a piece of wood. It looked frightening. Chapter 52. So powerful. Huaishur was stunned at first, then he was overjoyed. His confidence began to swell, and this time he took the initiative to attack without waiting for the opponent to attack again. The length of the sacrificial knife was not exaggerated. It was just a little longer than an ordinary dagger, and there was no problem with Huaishur's dagger fighting. The LV8 Roman dagger fighting technique was not inferior to the red gloves of the past. It had reached the top of the professional level. It could be said that there was no longer a trace of fancy, and it had become an out-and-out killing technique. Suddenly, the crying snake felt a burst of grief and anger. It had survived the bombing with great difficulty, but before it could react, it was already surrounded. Originally, it wanted to take back the holy artifact bestowed by the Lord and find a noob to trample on to vent its anger. However, it did not expect that its attack would be like stabbing into Paige's nest. Where did such a monster jump out from? Not only did he have a strange reaction and was not afraid of snake venom, but his swordsmanship was also frighteningly fierce. Under the situation where he did not have a stigmata, he directly jumped 2 levels and beat it like a child. Get lost. It roared with all its might, and the bone blade directly blocked Huaishur's knife. It turned around and wanted to escape, but it saw that there was a row of people behind it. Seeing that it wanted to escape, it was met with a hail of bullets, forcing it to confront Huaishur head-on and capture it alive. The crying snake was so angry that it wanted to laugh. Even if it was suppressed in weapon fighting, it was a second-stage gold ascendant. How could it be afraid of a noob who did not even have a stigmata. It would take a hostage first. Ignoring Huaishi's fierce attacks, the teeth in its mouth suddenly grew, and it spat out a wisp of clear venom. Then, the venom quickly evaporated in the air, turning into wisps of white mist. Wherever it passed, even the stones were corroded into holes. Huaishi was shocked and quickly retreated, but the crying snake seized the opportunity and took the initiative. One hand reached out and grabbed the blood-sucking blade, ignoring the danger, and the other hand reached out to grab Huaishi's neck. Then he blacked out and heard the endless roar of gunfire. With one hand holding the knife, Huaishi's other hand had already pulled out the pistol on his vest, pressed it against his forehead, and pulled the trigger repeatedly. The small caliber bullet couldn't even penetrate his skull, but the impact of the bullet wasn't inferior to the penetrating damage. He was completely stunned in an instant, and he didn't know if his brain had been shaken out. "Let go." Huaishi pulled out the sacrificial blade in his hand and swung it down with all his might. As the blade sliced through the air, pale white origin flame ignited in his hand. He added the weight of the axe to the blade and chopped off one of Huaishi's arms. He then pulled out the blade and swung it down again. Both of his arms were cleanly chopped off. After absorbing enough blood, the damaged sacrificial blade actually began to rapidly repair itself, returning to its original bright and beautiful appearance. It was as if it had just come out of the furnace, and it even began to misbehave, attempting to absorb Huaishi's origin substance. "Devour my origin substance? Are you kidding me?" Huaishi was amused. "You even dare to devour my negative energy-producing machine? Little bro, are you kidding me?" He directly turned the ashes back into origin substance, then poured a large amount of heart poison into the sacrificial blade, allowing it to absorb as much as it wanted. At first, it was still sucking in large mouthfuls of origin substance, but when it felt that something was wrong, it tried to stop. However, the hand of confinement grabbed the blade and poured it in. It drank to its heart's content, as if it was drinking chilly water. In the end, the blade began to tremble violently and let out a whine, as if it was begging for mercy, the pure negative energy, and the poison of death that was even purer than that caused it to suffer greatly. It was once again reduced to a dusty appearance and was held in Huaishi's hands like a grandson. It was extremely obedient. Now that he was done with internal security, it was time to deal with external security. Huaishi raised the sacrificial blade and turned it around, slashing it fiercely at the crying snake. The hand of confinement's terrifying weight wasn't inferior to that of an axe. Very quickly, the crying snake spasmed on the ground and stopped moving. It could only be said that a tiger had fallen from grace. This gold rank expert, who should have been able to beat Huaishi up in a direct confrontation, had actually been beaten up by Huaishi after being bombarded with missiles and incendiary bombs. In fact, Crow had even secretly peeled off 3 of the gold rank expert's horns. This thing was worth a lot of money. The crying snake's stigmatous poison essence was inside. With a bit of refinement, it could be used to create an antidote for most neurotoxins. It can probably be sold for a few tens of thousands. Crow paused for a moment, then added 1 gram. Upon hearing this, Huaishi, who had originally been a bit hesitant, decided to take the risk. Good stuff. This kind of high-tier, ascended expert really was full of treasures. After Huaishi was done, the suppression team, who had been waiting for a long time, rushed up and put layers of shackles on the dying, crying snake. First, it was shackles that bound the body, followed by an explosive collar that blocked the stigmata, followed by several tubes of red and green medicine that were injected into the carotid artery through a syringe gun. In the end, a 7 to 8 centimeters long nail was nailed into the neck, causing the corners of Huaishi's eyes to twitch wildly. Did they have to be So ruthless. The ferocious brothers of the suppression team all had calm expressions, waving their hands to indicate that this was just a basic operation. He didn't know if Director Fu wanted to make an example out of Wang Zhong, warning him to not mess around in the present world. It seemed that this was the only fish that had escaped the net. Huaisher once again searched the ruins, but this time nothing jumped out to stab him in the back. Unfortunately, he didn't find any trace of Wang Hai, not even his corpse. Logically speaking, a weakling like him who wasn't even an ascended expert should have died when the missile exploded, but Huaisher still had some doubts in his heart. That guy's life was so tough that even the red gloves couldn't kill him. Now that he couldn't find his corpse, it was hard to say where he was hiding to cause trouble. In the distant forest, the crow whistled and looked in the direction of another hill. As early as when the missile fell from the sky, the figure lying in wait in the dark had already turned around and fled like an old farmer who had stolen a watermelon but was shot by a cannon. He abandoned his companions and fled madly, not even looking back. It could only be said that Wang Hai's ability to flee in the face of danger was much better than his ability to plot and scheme. From the beginning to the end, the crow, who was watching from the side, saw everything, but he didn't say anything. He only shook his wings, and a feather fell. The feather fluttered and landed on his exposed nape. Like diluted ink, it melted and turned into a sunburn mark. What kind of fish could be caught in this quagmire if the bait was thrown out? It was very curious. Well done. AI Ching calmly glanced at the crying snake in the cage. No, it should be said that we caught a big fish. Director Fu looked at the burned ruins and sighed helplessly. The Astronomy Association calling for an air raid was cool, but the people responsible for cleaning up the scene were from the Special Affairs Division. He could only sigh at the fact that there were indeed some people in this group who were tough. Otherwise, they wouldn't even be able to find someone to record a statement. He really couldn't figure out where AI Ching's Russian Federation style of hardcore logic came from. However, he also had to thank her for her rash and extreme decision, which successfully avoided a tragic ambush. Just looking at the remains of those damned things at the scene was enough to give him a headache. Compared to this, what gave him a bigger headache was, how did so many mutants from the border appear in the present realm? These damned things were enough to fight a head-on encounter with a modern army. He irritably lit a cigarette. What the hell are the people at the customs doing? Although I really want to teach those good-for-nothings a lesson, unfortunately, these things have nothing to do with customs. AI Ching sighed, regretfully, and raised a new conjecture. What if they weren't smuggled in from the border, but raised in the present realm? Director Fu was stunned at first, then immediately frowned. If that was the case, it would explain where the money and supplies that the Savior Society had plundered all this time had gone, and where the privileges they had obtained from climbing to the top had been used. But this also meant that the seriousness of the matter had increased again. Ironically, for so many years, the shadow of the Savior Society had been quietly developing in the coastal areas, and the Special Affairs Division had no idea. In the end, it was a terrorist organization like Green Sun that exposed them. It could be expected that someone in the dark must have been covering up for them so that they could thrive. What was even more troublesome was that the mutants from the border were not creatures like chickens, ducks, pigs, and sheep that could thrive by simply feeding them grass roots. Their requirements for the environment were even more stringent than some protected animals. Whether it was the air, food, or even the depth of the environment, it would all affect their development and growth. Other than the giant biological experiment mechanism Survival Institute that had been closed by the Astronomy Society, there were very few institutions that could have this ability. And coincidentally, among them, there was an organization that was famous for its ability to raise mutants from the border, the Purified People. Almost groaning, Director Fu rubbed his head and spat out the name. Damn, this is a big problem. Are you sure? Isn't there a ready-made test subject? AI Ching raised her chin and looked at the sublimator in the cage. Her eyes became meaningful. If it's really that group of lunatics, you definitely won't be able to get anything out of them. It's better to make use of the waste. The moment all the purified people use external forces to complete the sublimator, their souls will be branded with the mark of their Lord. From then on, everything they have, including their lives and bodies, every drop of blood, and every piece of flesh will belong to the final Lord. In the paradise of hell, whether it's believers or messengers, all living things are just food reserves. Once they are judged to have lost their value, it's time for the Lord to feast on them. As she spoke, she looked at Director Fu. Director Fu's expression changed. After a long time, he sighed helplessly and waved his hand. Do as you wish. I'll sign it later. Thus, AI Ching withdrew her gaze in satisfaction and waved at Huai Shi. Huai Shi, who was having fun at the side, was startled. He looked around him, and after confirming that AI Ching was calling him, he instinctively felt uneasy. Old Tai, he dawdled on the spot, not wanting to go over. Even if I'm a brick in the astronomy society, it's not appropriate to move me around every day, right? Don't worry. I'm not asking you to go through fire and water. AI Ching pointed at the sacrificial knife in his pocket. Give me that thing. Huai Shi hesitated for a moment before finally taking out the knife. He turned the handle around and handed it to her. Be careful. This thing is very evil. It's just a D-class border relic. The risks are still within the acceptable range. AI Ching took out a handkerchief without a care. She wrapped the handle around it and held it in her hand. After leaving Huai Shi's hand, the thing began to be disobedient again. It kept trembling and letting out a low cry that made one's scalp numb. AI Ching supported herself with her walking stick and got up from the wheelchair. She held the knife in her other hand and walked forward expressionlessly. Through the cage, the blade pierced the throat of the sublimator. Pa! Chapter 53. Bang! It was as if a balloon filled with water had been smashed. Blood gushed out, but when the blood fell on the blade, it quickly disappeared and was completely absorbed by the blade. As the blood flowed in, the gap on the blade quickly grew and recovered. It was as if time had reversed. In the end, the bronze blade had beautiful golden lines. It had turned from a fake antique to a real work of art. It looked exquisite, as if it had been cast with life. AI Ching took a step back, ignoring the violent and thirsty cry from the blade. She coldly pulled the blade out of the crying snake's throat, shook off the blood on the blade, and returned it to Huai Shi. It's still useful. Although it's a bit greedy, it's still okay to deal with living creatures with blood. This kind of prohibited item will cause a lot of trouble in the market. You should take care of it carefully. She glanced at Director Fu, who wanted to say something but was hesitating. After all, it's also the responsibility of the Astronomical Association to store dangerous items. In this way, she forcefully classified this border relic, which had a threat level above C, as D, and then classified it as belonging to the Astronomical Association in the name of storage. Once she changed hands, this thing was surnamed Huai. Wasn't this a bit too much? Before he could object, Director Fu heard a sound that made his hair stand on end. On the corpse that was gradually losing its vitality, the temperature had yet to disperse, but no more blood spurted out from the wound. Instead, it was replaced by wisps of black smoke that rose from the limbs and bones. The black smoke was like a viscous liquid, covering the crying snake ascendant's corpse inch by inch, as if it was swallowing it into its stomach. Then, there was a creepy chewing sound. Every time there was a chewing sound, a huge gap would appear on the corpse, as if something invisible was constantly gnawing on it. In the end, the black smoke dissipated silently. In the layers of shackles, only a pale skeleton was left. Whether it was the soul, the flesh, or even the bone marrow, it had completely disappeared without a trace. Even if it was thrown into a pot to boil soup for a long time, it would probably only be a pot of boiling water. Even the calcium was so scarce that there was no room for absorption. A gentle breeze blew over, and it silently disappeared into a cloud of dust. Just like that, the short banquet ended in everyone's dazed expression. Then, I'll leave the rest to you. AI Ching nodded calmly at Director Fu. I will submit a request for assistance to the higher-ups. When the time comes, please cooperate with the Social Security Bureau and the Special Affairs Division. Director Fu was silent for a long time before he nodded dryly. Next, it was up to the Special Affairs Department to clean up the scene. Thanks to AI Ching's style, Weisher once again enjoyed the special treatment of being picked up by a car. It was like a leader going on an inspection trip. When they arrived at the place, they would hold a meeting. Then, they would bring local specialties and send them back the same way they came. By the way, come here tomorrow afternoon. Before he left, AI Ching said to him, "There's a package for you." "What express delivery?" "East Wind." Weisher glanced at the lady in the wheelchair, who had just used missiles to bombard the ground. He didn't dare to ask more questions. In short, it was as if the mission had been completed with a ding. Equipment +1, materials +3, experience +5. It seemed like there was also a foreshadowing of the main storyline. He still had many questions in his heart, but thankfully, he soon had a solution. Weisher took out his phone and opened the contact list. Then, which lucky friend would get the chance to treat him to lunch and answer his questions? What the hell? Half an hour later, in the most popular Whole Sparrow banquet hall in Exanhai, Yu Dongri spat out the tea that he had just poured into his mouth and coughed violently. "Returned pure people, what's wrong?" Weisher was confused. Yu Dongri gasped for a long time before he recovered. He lowered his voice and asked, "Are you sure it's blessed people, returned pure people?" Weisher had just nodded when he saw the old man bow to him and open his mouth to say something. He hurriedly pressed down old Lu's hand. "Don't be in such a hurry. Old Tai, what the hell is the returned pure people?" "It's an illegal religious group. To put it simply, it's a cult." Yu Dongri's explanation was concise and to the point. Now he was wiping the cold sweat from his forehead. "Friend, how did you get yourself into such a big mess? They are a bunch of crazy people, but they are fighting cultists among cultists, super terrorists among terrorists. Just like that, IS. You know about it, right?" "Guizhen, right?" Weisher nodded with understanding. "I've seen it before. Go away your head." Yu Dongri was so angry that he slapped the back of his head again. "Can you be more serious, brother? If you don't handle this properly, not only will you be finished, the whole of X-High might be gone. But even if you put it that way, I have no idea." Weisher thought for a long time and asked, "Compared to Green Sun, who is more powerful?" Yu Dongri was stumped by this strange question for a long time. It was unclear what kind of thought he was forming or how to correct this thing's train of thought. They are not the same category. He stuttered for a long time, but did not know how to explain it to Weisher. He could only say, "Let's put it this way, Green Sun is a group of antisocial psychopaths, but their main purpose is to carry out a terrorist attack on the astronomy club. You understand, right?" Weisher thought for a long time and slapped his knee. "You're talking about the heroes of Liangshan, right?" "About the same in terms of nature." Although the heroes of Liangshan and Green Sun are not good people, their main goal is to kill their way to Tokyo and take over the throne. Then the elder brother will be the emperor, the second brother will be the second emperor, and I will be the general or something. So, in the end, it's actually an internal struggle. Yu Dongri sighed and put down the teacup. Let's talk about the pure people. This illegal organization is not only antisocial but also anti-human, but its nature is more complicated than Green Sunday. Yes, continue. Huaisher nodded and silently jotted it down in a small notebook. Their base is in hell outside the border, a place called the Land of Bliss. Even if the Astronomy Club can't get the coordinates, there's no way to wipe them out. Over the years, they've stirred up a lot of trouble. It's said that's how Manchester was destroyed. But in the end, their biggest threat is not themselves, but the thing behind them. Hearing the name Manchester, Huaisher was stunned for a moment. Soon, he was attracted by Yu Dongri's next words. What they worship is one of the 24 elements of destruction calculated by the Astronomy Club according to the prophecy of the former president. It's not an exaggeration to call it a god. The rancher, element of destruction. Huaisher was stunned. Why is it called the rancher when it sounds so awesome? Does he raise cows? Something like that. Yu Dongri said numbly. The reason why it's called the element of destruction is that in the assessment of the Astronomy Club, it has the probability, ability, or aptitude to destroy things in the present world. It's not something as gentle as a nuclear bomb, but a more twisted qualitative change and subversion. In short, it's the power to completely turn the present world into hell. You're right to call it the Demon King of Destruction. It's said that there are 23 others like him. Only a few have been announced. You may be used to seeing the remains of one of them. As he said that, he pointed to the sky outside the window. Huaisher curiously poked his head out and looked at the blue afternoon sky. The white clouds were mixed with the traces of fish. They came and went among the corals in the clouds and cast ripples on the ground. He was first at a loss, then confused, and then shocked. Wait, coral clouds? That's right. Yu Dongri took a sip of tea expressionlessly. To be precise, it should be called Old Gaia, which represents the old world that was destroyed. Those things are too far away for you. You know, the coral clouds floating in the sky are its corpses. Rancher, Kingdom of Heaven, Piper, Old Gaia, Gray-Robed Man, Golden Dawn. Among the 9 elements of destruction announced so far, Rancher is ranked first, according to the news secretly circulating. It even involves the secret of the collective fall of the old gods in 1650. The water behind it is unfathomable, enough to drown 100,000 of you. How about it? Are you scared now? Huaisher was silent for a long time, then raised his hand. Excuse me, I seem to have heard. Kingdom of Heaven? Yu Dongri looked at him for a long time, confused. Ah, it's Kingdom of Heaven. It's the literal meaning of heaven, but I don't know the specific details. Why are you asking this? Nothing, just asking. Huaisher smiled awkwardly. He felt that he had heard this term somewhere before, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He could only scratch his head. You haven't told me why Rancher has such a weird name. Simply put, it's probably the food chain. Yu Dongri scratched his head, picked up the chopsticks, and drew a circle around everything that Huaisher saw. Finally, he stuck the chopsticks into the pot of dried sparrow meat that had just been served. He picked up a sparrow leg. You see, in the eyes of the purified people, this world is a huge food chain that runs through the present world, the border, and hell. Just like sheep eating grass and people eating sheep, if the clergymen see believers as sheep and call themselves shepherds, then at the top of this distorted hell food chain, the person who commands all the shepherds is Rancher, right? After the essence of the gods was distorted by hell, Rancher can be said to be an out-and-out evil god. The whole world is just a huge ranch for Rancher, and all living things are just his food. What the purified seek is to become one with their god in the final contraction and cycle of the food chain, becoming the incarnation of the ranch master. In fact, the so-called blessed land is just a plate for the ranch master, and the purified are merely tools for the ranch master to clean his utensils. Even the tools themselves are edible and environmentally friendly materials, just like this. He paused for a moment, stuffed the roasted sparrow leg into his mouth, and chewed loudly. Now, you understand that you're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.